Chapter 432. Guifeng Demon Monarch, Venerable Wu Ming, and the others all left. But Mo Tiange and Nie Wushang were still worried about this matter. Although a late nascent soul cultivator like Guifeng Demon Monarch wouldn't take them seriously, other people in Guifeng City might not. It would be fine if Guifeng Demon Monarch won in this trip. But if he lost, his disciples and subordinates would probably come to trouble them. The two of them didn't return to the cultivation room for a while, but sat in the hall of the cave in silence. After a while, both of them were shocked and looked out of the cave. They both felt the amazing fluctuations coming from outside Guifeng City. Obviously, the two late nascent soul cultivators had started to fight. The power of late nascent soul cultivators can't stop Guifeng City, even if there are restrictions to protect the city. Nie Wushang sighed. Even they were affected, so it could be seen how strong the spiritual pressure was when the two of them fought. Nie Wushang was right. Guifeng City was in a panic because of the spiritual pressure from the two late nascent soul cultivators. Countless low-level cultivators and mortals vomited blood. Unable to control themselves, they had to hide in the formation arranged by the city lord's mansion. The high-level cultivators stopped their closed-door meditation without exception, walked out of their caves, and looked outside the city anxiously. This turmoil lasted for 3 days. 3 days later, the fluctuations outside the city finally stopped. Guifeng Demon Monarch lost. Nie Wushang opened her eyes and said, Mo Tiange knew she had a treasure with her, so she was very sensitive to devil aura. Since she said so, it was most likely true. Should we leave here? Nie Wushang hesitated. It's better to find another quiet cave for closed-door meditation. But my situation is different from yours. I just advanced to the late nascent soul realm, so my devil aura is not very stable. Mo Tiange frowned. I'm fine. After I advanced, I spent some time to stabilize my realm. She pondered for a moment. In fact, we don't have to be so anxious. This matter doesn't have much to do with us. Even if someone comes to trouble us, they won't go too far. Nie Wushang answered absent-mindedly. Logically speaking, although she was already in the late stage of the core formation realm, she was of no value to Guifeng Demon Lord, a cultivator in the late stage of the nascent soul realm. And with the way Guifeng Demon Lord governed Guifeng City, he should not vent his anger on her. His disciples and subordinates should not go too far either. If that was the case, she didn't mind enduring it for a while. Mo Tiange stared at her. She hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she didn't say anything. This matter originally had nothing to do with Nie Wushang. If the two of them didn't live together, it wouldn't have implicated her. However, they had reunited in a different place, and had been companions for so many years, so they already regarded each other as friends. If she apologized, it would be too formal. By the way, how did you get a Buddhist holy item? Why haven't you mentioned it all these years? Nie Wushang asked in bewilderment. Regarding this matter, Mo Tiange could only smile bitterly. If they didn't come looking for me, I really wouldn't have known that this thing was actually a Buddhist sacred object. If I knew, I definitely would have concealed my identity and hid. How could I have let them track me all the way here? Soon after, she briefly told Nie Wushang what happened 40 years ago. After figuring out the cause and effect, she wasn't surprised that the Buddhist cultivators tracked them here. That year, after she seized the inescapable net, she lived in Sky Snow City for a while, then went to Carefree Valley, Starfall City, and finally settled in Guifeng City. All these years, although her whereabouts were uncertain, she never disguised herself or changed her name. She also didn't deliberately hide in public places. Since Huayan Temple was a big cultivation group, it had its own way to find her. After listening to her, Nie Wushang said, I see. It seems that Jiawu isn't ordinary. How could an ordinary disciple casually go out with a sacred object? Moreover, he was driven out back then, but now he's following revered Wu Ming. Not only has he advanced to the core formation realm, but he's also very dignified. I'm afraid what happened back then was related to the internal strife of Huayan Temple. Mo Tiange was a disciple of a big cultivation group, so she knew more about this kind of internal strife than Nie Wushang. She could almost deduce what Jiwu experienced back then. Since she had nothing to do, She could inquire about what happened to Huayan Temple in the past. After they finished talking about this matter, the two of them didn't say anything, but neither of them had the intention to return to the cultivation room. The 5 saints and the legend of the 5 saints were originally just rumors to them. But now, such an incident happened right before their eyes, and they were almost involved in it. Emotienga, in particular, had a lot on her mind. She originally thought the inescapable net was an imitation, but it turned out to be the real thing. Then what about the Fuxing sword? She asked revered Wu Ming what the 5 sacred objects were because she had a strong premonition. Revered Wu Ming's answer was both within her expectations and beyond her expectations. It was within her expectations because she had a premonition that the Fuxing sword might also be one. And it turned out it really was. It was beyond her expectations because she originally thought the legend of the 5 saints was very far away from her. But it turned out she actually had 2 sacred objects. Then she immediately remembered that many people knew she had the Fuxing sword in her hands. When she exchanged for the Fuxing sword from Devil Monarch Xianyue, there were 7 cultivators in total. Those cultivators were scattered all over Yunzhong, and many of them were disciples of big cultivation groups. Not good. Emotienga suddenly thought of something and stood up abruptly, drenched in cold sweat. What's wrong? Nie Wushang looked at her in confusion. Yang Qingji, Emotienga muttered. Yang Qingji knows. Nie Wushang frowned, not understanding what she meant. You mean Yang Qingji knows us? What's the big deal? We don't have any grudges against him, right? No. Emotienga shook her head with a pale face. Emotienga shook her head with a pale face. Do you remember what the 5 holy artifacts revered Avidya mentioned just now? Of course I remember. In addition to the Heavenly Devil Tower and the inescapable net, there's also the soul-restricting bead, Wu Ming Lu, and the Fuxing sword. Do you think the soul-restricting bead is the one in Ling Yunhe's hands? She thought for a moment, then shook her head. It shouldn't be, right? If the soul-restricting bead is a sacred object, how could it be taken away from the cultivation group by a core formation cultivator? I don't care whether Ling Yunhe's soul-restricting bead is the one or not. Emotienga sat down again and held her forehead. What I want to tell you is that the Fuxing sword is in my hands. Clang! The teacup Nie Wushang just picked up fell on the table. She suddenly looked up at Emotienga, narrowed her eyes and said in disbelief, What did you say? I said one of the 5 sacred objects, the Fuxing sword, is in my hands. Emotienga slowly repeated. And Yang Qingji knows about this. Nie Wushang didn't need to say anything else. In an instant, her complexion turned deathly pale. In that case Before she could finish, she suddenly grabbed Emotienga's sleeve. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go before they come. Go! Emotienga smiled bitterly. Guifang City is the real inescapable net, with a late-stage nascent soul cultivator guarding it. Where should we go? There was still only one answer. Enter the virtual sky world. But in that case, she would have to face the problem of how to explain to Nie Wushang. Upon hearing that, Nie Wushang let go of her hand dejectedly. Right. If they've already noticed us, then we wait. She looked up and asked. When revered Wu Ming answered this question, Yang Qingji wasn't there, right? Right. Emotienga hesitated for a moment. But if revered Wu Ming knows, doesn't Guifang Demon Monarch know? Then think about it. When Yang Qingji first knew you had the Fuxing sword, did he have any special reaction? Emotienga thought for a moment, then shook her head. I exchanged the Fuxing sword from a devil cultivator. At that time, there were several core formation cultivators present. If they knew, how could they let me exchange it? At that time, in their eyes, the Fuxing sword was just a very useless ancient treasure that lost its former power, but was still very famous. Nie Wushang breathed a sigh of relief. You see, Yang Qingji didn't know at that time. So Guifang Demon Monarch didn't tell him before. Maybe he still doesn't know? Emotienga pondered silently. During this period of time, it was really hard to say whether Guifang Demon Monarch told Yang Qingji or not. In the past few decades, the Heavenly Devil Tower caused turmoil in the whole of Yunzhong, and the legend of the 5 saints of Yunzhong became widely known. Under such circumstances, the 5 sacred objects, which were originally very secretive, became an interesting anecdote passed by word of mouth among Yunzhong cultivators. It wasn't impossible for those late nascent soul cultivators, who knew the secret, to tell their juniors about it. No, if Yang Qingji knew the Fuxing sword was one of the 5 sacred objects, and she was in Guifang City, how could he have waited until now and not come to ask for it? That meant Yang Qingji most likely didn't know about this. Thinking up to this point, Mo Tiange felt a little relieved. Up until now, no one had come to trouble her. At the very least, it showed that the several cultivators who knew she had the Fuxing sword didn't know it was one of the 5 sacred objects. However, this incident reminded her of something. Those people didn't know now, but what about in the future? Among those 7 people, there were many disciples from big cultivation groups, and among them were people like Han Shizhi, who was both scheming and had a high status. It was very likely they would participate in the secret affairs of their cultivation groups. At that time, if they knew she had the Fuxing sword, they definitely wouldn't be polite, and would go to her door to snatch it. In that case, I should be safe for the time being. But now, I have to disguise myself and hide my identity. Seeing that Mo Tiange understood, Nie Wushang also relaxed and said with a smile, "You still want to hide your identity? Even your name is fake." Mo Tiange also smiled. She really didn't use her real name much outside. When she was young, she changed her name to Yi Xiaotian because of her father's clan. After she came to Yunzhong, the name Qin Wei came from her Taoist name. Although she wasn't the same as before, she never lost the sense of crisis she had when she was young. In fact, you don't have to worry too much. I know a little about disguise, so I can teach you. After this matter is over, you should leave Guifang City as soon as possible. Disguise yourself and hide in the secular world. Presumably, they won't be able to find you no matter how strong they are. Based on the current situation, this was already a relatively good method. Mo Tiange thought about it and sighed. Inescapable net is fine. I got it by accident, and it was the original owner who came to ask for it, so I'll just hand it over. However, I got this Fuxing sword fair and square, so I'm really not willing to let them have it so easily. Otherwise, as long as I handed the thing over, I wouldn't have anything to do with it. Nie Wushang curled her lips. What are you talking about? You're good at everything, but you're too unambitious. If there's something good, it'll be a waste not to take it, and it'll be a waste not to snatch it. Whoever is stronger and luckier will get it. Unless it's absolutely necessary, why should I give it to them? Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. Although she had left Master Song Feng, Nie Wushang's way of thinking was deeply influenced by Master Song Feng, who was much more overbearing than her. In fact, she didn't want to give it to them, but she was more afraid of trouble. In any case, as long as the Fuxing sword was in her hands, danger would always follow her. After a few days, if Guifang Demon Monarch didn't come to trouble her, she could leave Guifang City. In addition, she also had to find a chance to go to Nanzhou and see Venerable Avidya. When she handed the inescapable net to Venerable Avidya, she still had a question she wanted to ask, but it wasn't convenient for her to say it out loud, so she just transmitted her voice to him, saying she would ask him in private. Later, Guifang Demon Monarch just happened to arrive, so Venerable Avidya didn't answer. However, since she handed over the inescapable net so straightforwardly, and didn't make any excessive requests, Venerable Avidya presumably wouldn't refuse. Just as she thought about this, Nie Wushang suddenly raised her eyebrows and said, "Someone's coming." Chapter 433. The aura was getting closer and closer. The newcomer didn't seem to have any intention of hiding his tracks, and just walked slowly towards their cave. He was in the middle stage of the core formation realm, and he was alone. Yang Qingji, Mo Tiange and Nie Wushang looked at each other and guessed at the same time. The answer was soon revealed. Yang Qingji's voice came from outside. "Fellow Taoists, old friends meet again. You don't mind meeting me, right?" Yang Qingji's real voice was clear and a little sharp, but his attitude was always so arrogant. His voice, which was supposed to be pleasant to listen to, always had a hint of impatience in it, which made people unhappy. Nie Wushang asked with her eyes. Mo Tiange pondered for a while then nodded. Yang Qingji coming alone was already very clear, He shouldn't be looking for trouble. Although they didn't have any friendship with Yang Qingji, they didn't have any grudges either. After Mo Tiange removed the restriction, Nie Wuxiang opened the cave. Yang Qingji was standing outside, dressed in black, without a mask, and without any magic weapon in his hands. Seeing the two of them, he first nodded to Mo Tiange. Fellow Taoist Qin. Mo Tiange smiled. He was so casual, so she didn't salute him. Fellow Taoist Yang, long time no see. Then Yang Qingji's gaze fell on Nie Wuxiang. His eyes were cold. After staring for a while, he said, "You must be fellow Taoist Tiancan, right? I didn't know fellow Taoist Tiancan was a woman disguised as a man." Nie Wuxiang wasn't wearing a mask or a disguise, so her gender was obvious at first glance. She also didn't want to hide it anymore. That day in Carefree Valley, she just happened to disguise herself to avoid being tracked by Tianyan sect. It wasn't intentional. Fellow Taoist Yang has a good eye, Nie Wuxiang said faintly, not intending to oppose him. In Carefree Valley, she only mocked Yang Qingji because she disliked his behavior. She really didn't need to remember such a trivial matter until now. Unfortunately, Yang Qingji obviously didn't think so. He raised the corner of his mouth, looking like he was smiling, but his eyes were gloomy and his voice was full of sarcasm. "I really can't tell. Fellow Taoist Tiancan not only has a fake appearance, but also a fake gender and cultivation level. You're obviously a devil cultivator, but your disguise is so flawless. I just don't know if his name and identity are also fake." Upon hearing such provocative words, Nie Wuxiang just indifferently glanced at him and said, "Whether it's true or false, what does it have to do with fellow Taoist Yang? If fellow Taoist Yang is so free, why don't you think about how to take back the sacred object?" Yang Qingji was fuming with anger at her attitude. She was clearly mocking him for not doing his job properly. It was childish and ridiculous. Mo Tiange sighed inwardly. She hadn't seen him for several decades. But why was this fellow Taoist Yang still so angry? Aside from mocking her a few times, Nie Wuxiang hadn't really offended him. "Fellow Taoist Yang," she promptly interrupted. "It's been many years since we last met. I wonder if fellow Taoist has any important matters to discuss with me this time?" Hearing her voice, Yang Qingji became a little more rational, and he said lightly, "You two have been in Guifang City for many years, but I didn't know. Today I specially came to pay a visit. Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have any objections, right?" Mo Tiange paused for a moment then said, "Of course I don't have any objections." He thought to himself, why are Yang Qingji's words so unpleasant? If you want to visit, then visit. Would it kill you to say some polite words? "Fellow Taoist Yang, please come in. This immortal's cave is simple and crude, so I'm sorry for not being a good host. Please don't take offense." Hearing what Mo Tiange said, Yang Qingji swaggered into the immortal's cave and sat down. He still didn't say any polite words. However, no matter how rude he was, Mo Tiange didn't mind. It was fine as long as he didn't come for the supporting sword. The three of them sat down. Yang Qingji sized up this simple immortal's cave with a critical gaze. Nie Wuxiang was bored, and Mo Tiange was full of doubts. After a while, Yang Qingji finally finished sizing up the place. He picked up the teacup and took a sip then said, "Fellow Taoists, since you came to Guifang City, why didn't you come to say hello? If it weren't for this coincidence, I wouldn't have known you two were here." Mo Tiange smiled and said, "Presumably, your master has already investigated. When fellow Taoist Tiancan and I came here, we were both injured, and were looking for a place to recuperate. Later, Yunzhong was in chaos, so it wasn't convenient for us to disturb you." Yang Qingji looked a little uncomfortable when he heard the word investigated. He said he came to visit, but in fact he was ordered by his master to see if there was anything unusual about these two people. After all, things like Buddhist sacred objects were obtained from them, so he had to be cautious. While he was drinking tea with his head lowered, he secretly glanced at Mo Tiange and Nie Wuxiang. He only felt relieved when he found that their expressions were normal, as if this kind of thing was common, and they didn't care about it at all. However, he was thinking too much. Not to mention that they didn't have any friendship. Even if they did, it wouldn't be a big deal for them to come and probe them when they encountered such a big event. Mo Tiange and Nye Wushang were used to it, so why would they care? This also showed that although Yang Qingji's master was complicated, he himself didn't understand the ways of the world. Fellow Taoist Yang. Since Yang Qingji didn't say anything for a long time, Mo Tiange had to break the silence first. We haven't seen each other for 40 years, since we parted at Carefree Valley. I didn't expect you to advance to the middle stage smoothly. Congratulations. Yang Qingji said uncomfortably. Why are you so polite, fellow Taoist Qin? If you want to congratulate me, it's the two of you who advanced to the late stage. My achievement isn't worth mentioning. Mo Tiange said with a smile. How is it the same? Fellow Taoist Tianqin and I have been hiding in Guifang City all these years, and haven't gone out to gain experience. On the contrary, fellow Taoist Yang not only escaped from the turmoil in Heavenly Devil Tower, but also advanced. This is much better than us cultivating in seclusion. Although it was a compliment, Mo Tiange wasn't talking nonsense. They hadn't seen the situation in Yunzhong in the past few decades, but they knew how tragic it was from the news outside. It wasn't easy for Yang Qingji to survive in this kind of turmoil, and even advance successfully. Yang Qingji's expression became a lot better after hearing this. He showed a slight smile and said, Fellow Taoists, you're busy, so I won't waste your time. In fact, I came here for two reasons. First, I reunited with an old friend, so I came to visit. Second, fellow Taoist Qin actually has a Buddhist sacred object in your hands. I'm very curious, so. I see. Mo Tiange's expression was calm. She said with a smile. In fact, I also think this matter is very inconceivable. If Huayan Temple hadn't come looking for me, I wouldn't have known I had a precious treasure. Alas, I had a precious treasure but didn't know it. When I found out, I had to hand it over. It's obvious that this thing really doesn't belong to me. It's useless to ask for more. When she said this, Mo Tiange looked regretful and deeply regretful. Seeing that she didn't seem to be pretending, Yang Qingji couldn't help but sympathize with her. He said, Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't have to feel too regretful. The Heavenly Devil Tower alone caused several decades of turmoil in Yunzhong, and countless cultivators died. It's clear that sometimes having a precious treasure isn't a good thing. Cultivators like us don't have enough strength to hold this kind of magic weapon, so it's better to hand it over. Otherwise, it's not worth it to lose our lives. Fellow Taoist Yang is right. Mo Tiange readily agreed. If I didn't think that way, I also wouldn't have been willing to hand over this treasure. Who told us to have low cultivation levels? There are some things we can only endure. It's good that fellow Taoist Qin can think things through. When Yang Qingji said this, his tone was a bit awkward. Once he finished speaking, he impatiently asked, May I know how fellow Taoist Qin obtained this Buddhist holy relic? Mo Tiange already knew she had to explain everything, so she didn't waste any time. She told them what happened 40 years ago. In the end, she said, Speaking of which, not long after, I met fellow Taoist Yang. But I don't know if fellow Taoist Yang was in Sky Snow City at that time. I see. Yang Qingji felt it was a pity. At that time, he seemed to be rushing to Sky Snow City, but unfortunately, he almost missed the holy relic. However, even if he ran into it, it would have been useless. At that time, he had no idea this thing was one of the 5 holy relic. Feeling there was nothing to ask about this matter, Yang Qingji changed the subject. May I know what fellow Taoists plan to do next? Seeing that Yang Qingji didn't ask any more questions, Mo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, What else can I do? Fellow Taoist Yang also knows I'm not from Yunzhong. If it weren't for the turmoil in Yunzhong these past few decades, I would have left and returned to my hometown. Now that the turmoil has gradually subsided, I'll leave as soon as I finish dealing with my own affairs. Oh, I forgot. Speaking of which, fellow Taoist Qin, you've been in Yunzhong for a long time. You haven't returned for a long time. You must miss your family very much, right? Yes. Mo Tiange's eyes were filled with longing. Maybe they'll come to Yunzhong. What about fellow Taoist Tianquan? Yang Qingji shifted his gaze to Nye Wushang. Why haven't you spoken? Nye Wushang seemed to be lost in thought. Upon hearing his voice, she glanced at him and said faintly, I don't like to talk. What do you want to ask fellow Taoist Yang? Yang Qingji frowned slightly and repeated his question. May I know what fellow Taoist Tianqin plans to do next? Do you want to leave Guifang City? Nie Wushang was silent for a moment before she answered. I can't answer fellow Taoist Yang for the time being. I've always done things as I please. I might leave tomorrow. Or I might stay here for a few more years. She really couldn't make up her mind. Although the matter of the Buddhist holy relic had nothing to do with them, it was hard to say what consequences it would have. But if she left in her current state, it wouldn't be appropriate. Seeing that the atmosphere was a bit strange, Mo Tiange smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Yang only asked about us. But I wonder what your plans are? We've been in Guifang City all these years. I heard you're the disciple most likely to advance to the nascent soul realm under your master. And you're very valued. Once you advance to the nascent soul realm, you might inherit the position of the city lord. It's really worth celebrating. When this matter was brought up, Yang Qingji didn't look happy at all. He said faintly, Fellow Taoist Qin is considerate. Unfortunately, this isn't what I want. Upon hearing his words and tone, Mo Tiange really wanted to step on Yang Qingji's face. Even if he still looked like a teenager, he was already a core formation cultivator. No matter how young he was, he'd lived for more than 100 years. Could it be that he didn't know how to say polite words? This time she didn't feel like replying. The three of them sat in silence for a while. Yang Qingji finally realized the atmosphere wasn't right. He looked at Mo Tiange, then looked at Nie Wushang. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he swallowed his words and said gloomily, Fellow Taoists, it seems you have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. I'll visit you again later if I have the chance. Upon hearing what he said, Mo Tiange and Nie Wushang finally smiled and stood up to see him off. Fellow Taoist Yang, please go ahead. We'll meet again if there's a chance. Yang Qingji looked at Nie Wushang's rare smile and felt even more depressed. He casually cupped his hands, then stood up to leave. Chapter 434. Yang Qingji's visit basically showed Guifang demon monarch's attitude. The Buddhist sacred object was no longer in Mo Tiange's hands, so the two of them had no value to Guifang demon monarch. Since Yang Qingji didn't say anything, they shouldn't have any trouble. Mo Tiange breathed a sigh of relief, but she wasn't completely relieved. She still had the Fuxing sword, so she had to hide her traces as soon as possible before others found out. Nie Wushang also understood this, so she hurriedly taught her some disguising techniques and taught her the appearance mimicking technique. The so-called appearance mimicking technique was actually a kind of illusion technique. This kind of technique could even fool high-level cultivators. But Nie Wushang said that since it was a technique, it could be cracked. Although her technique could be regarded as high-level, it probably couldn't fool late-stage nascent soul cultivators. For this reason, Nie Wushang especially told her that it'd be best for her to master the art of disguise as soon as possible. The crudest method was also the one that was the hardest to crack. If she could dress herself up perfectly, it wouldn't matter how strong other people's divine senses were. Mo Tiange agreed to each of her instructions. Then she bid farewell to Nie Wushang and quietly left Guifang City. Of course, Guifang demon monarch must have known about this. However, she was useless now, so no one came to stop her. She boldly left Guifang City, fled east for several hundred miles, and entered the complex mountain range of northern Lin country. There were neither outstanding spirit veins nor dense devil aura here. Except for a few low-level cultivators, there was no one else here. Mo Tiange carefully paid attention to her back. After finding no traces of others, she entered the virtual sky world and disguised herself according to Nie Wushang's instructions. She stayed in the virtual sky world for several days. Even if someone really followed her, they should have left, so Mo Tiange left the virtual sky world. At this time, she already looked like a young scholar. Although Nie Wushang said her appearance mimicking technique couldn't fool late-stage nascent soul cultivators, Mo Tiange still used it. First, she was a bit shorter than Nie Wushang, which made it easy for her to arouse suspicion if she disguised as a man, but it was basically useless if she disguised as a woman. Second, she had the spirit-concealing pendant, which, when used with the appearance-mimicking technique, might be able to fool high-level cultivators. Besides, late-stage nascent soul cultivators were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. There were only 4 or 5 in the celestial pole. Even if there were more in Yunzhong than in the celestial pole, there were at most 10 or so. How could they be encountered so easily? As long as she did not reveal the matter of the Fuxing sword, no one would see her even if she wanted to. After transforming, Emo Tienga swaggered out of the northern Qiling country's mountain range and entered the market. She didn't hide her cultivation level. Although core formation cultivators were high-level cultivators in Yunzhong, they weren't rare. This way, she could avoid being disturbed by low-level cultivators. Once she returned to Eastern Tang, she randomly chose a cultivation town near the sea and inquired about the South Pole Island. Sure enough, very few people knew about the South Pole Island. After asking many people, a cultivator who had just returned from the North Pole Island told her that the South Pole Island had already sunk. This news was the same as several years ago. It seemed that the miracle didn't happen. The South Pole Island really disappeared. Emo Tienga had long been mentally prepared for this, so she wasn't too depressed. She quickly pulled herself together and continued to inquire about information. Actually, she could have gone to the Juyan sect to ask for information while she was collecting the debt from Ling Yunha. Or she could have gone to Nanzhou's Baifu Mountain and asked revered Wu Ming for advice. However, she didn't dare to rashly reveal her identity because of the Fuxing sword, so she could only put this matter aside for the time being. Deepwater City was a small city located on the edge of the North Sea. In terms of size, it was only slightly bigger than an ordinary town. In terms of power, there was only one small and medium-sized cultivation group with an early-stage nascent soul cultivator in the surrounding area. However, this small city was very prosperous because it happened to be located on the edge of the North Sea, across the sea from the North Pole Island. No matter how rich a place was, a teleportation formation was still too expensive for low-grade cultivators. Thus, crossing the sea became their choice. Moreover, there were many low-level sea beasts in the sea area near Deepwater City, so some low-level cultivators made a living by hunting beasts in the vicinity. Relying on these low-level cultivators, Deepwater City gradually prospered and became a small beast core trading market on the edge of the North Sea. Over time, even some high-level cultivators who were too lazy to go to the North Pole Island would come to Deepwater City to look for some special beast cores. The tea house in Deepwater City was particularly lively today. Most of the cultivators coming and going in a city were of the same standard. For a small city like Deepwater City, there wouldn't be many cultivators above the core formation realm coming and going like some big cities. Usually, only foundation building cultivators were in charge of the tea house in Deepwater City. Occasionally, a core formation cultivator would come and collect beast cores, which was why the tea house would be lively for a while. However, today's grand occasion wasn't like the past, which was caused by core formation cultivators collecting beast cores. Brother, make way, make way. A youngster in the 5th layer of the aura refining realm squeezed in from outside the tea house and shouted at the cultivator in front of him. Excuse me, excuse me. The cultivator in front of him was unwilling to give way and only said, Brother, first come, first served. The youngster blinked and said in puzzlement, Brother, it only takes a while to appraise the beast cores, right? You've been crowding around here for a long time. Aren't you just here to watch the show? Beast cores? The cultivator was surprised. Didn't you inquire clearly? This time, we're not here to collect beast cores. Ah, the youngster was puzzled. Didn't we just hear that a core formation senior came to our Deepwater City? If he's not here to collect beast cores, what else is he here for? A small city like Deepwater City was destined to have no high-level cultivators staying here. Those high-level cultivators were either just passing by or coming to collect special beast cores. There had never been an exception. Those who really wanted to collect high-level beast cores or hunt high-level sea beasts would directly teleport to North Pole Island, who would come to Deepwater City. Before the cultivator could answer, someone next to him interrupted. Fellow Taoist, didn't you inquire about this before you came? This senior isn't here to collect beast cores. He's here to collect anecdotes. Huh. The youngster was surprised. What's going on? Anecdotes? He couldn't be blamed for being so surprised. When they first heard about this, everyone had the same reaction. Which high-level cultivator wasn't busy with cultivation? What anecdotes? What was the use of hearing them? This senior said he's collecting these anecdotes to explore some secret places. Some things aren't strange just by looking at them. But if he collects them all together, he might be able to find some wonderful places. His cultivation has reached a bottleneck, so he's traveling everywhere to collect anecdotes, hoping to find some clues that might help him break through the bottleneck. So that's how it is. The youngster was suddenly enlightened. He touched his head and said, "These seniors with profound cultivation levels really think more clearly than us. Isn't that so? If this senior didn't tell me, I would have never thought about it." The first cultivator agreed. The two of them chatted for a while and got a little closer to each other. The cultivator pulled the youngster forward and said, "Let's just listen here. This senior is very generous. As long as you tell him some rumors, he'll accept any medicinal pills or spirit stones he wants. If someone asks for guidance, he won't refuse. Let's listen on the side. Maybe we'll gain something." Right after he said that, another person next to him made a gesture of silence and said in a low voice, "This senior is going to talk. Don't make a sound." The cultivator promptly shut his mouth and listened attentively. After a while, a gentle male voice was heard. "There's nothing wrong with your cultivation level. What's wrong is your state of mind. Every time you advance, aside from improving your cultivation level, your understanding of the Tao Scripture's teachings will also go one step further. Put down your cultivation for the time being and walk around. Once your understanding of the Scripture's teachings has gone one step further, you can go back and cultivate." The foundation-building cultivator, sitting on the other side of the long table, was startled. He carefully savored it and suddenly understood. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you for your guidance, Senior. Junior finally understands." On the other side of the long table, the gentle young scholar waved his hand and said, "This is your reward. No need to thank me." He then looked behind the foundation-building cultivator and asked, "Is there anyone else?" Me. Someone immediately squeezed in from behind. It was a man in his 30s, dressed in short clothes, and his cultivation level was in the aura refining realm. At first glance, it was obvious that he was a low-level individual cultivator who hunted sea beasts for a living in Deepwater City. If it was under other circumstances, he definitely wouldn't dare to be so presumptuous in front of a foundation-building cultivator. However, this core formation senior said that regardless of cultivation level, as long as the information he provided was valuable, he could exchange it for a reward. When the foundation-building cultivator saw this man leaning against him, he frowned. However, there was a core formation senior in front of him. Moreover, this senior had been smiling and didn't show the slightest bit of impatience, so he could only endure it. He cupped his hands and bowed to this senior before pushing the crowd aside and leaving the tea house. "Sit." The young scholar pointed at the seat in front of him and said, "Do you have any news?" The man cautiously sat down and glanced at the young scholar. A nervous expression appeared on his face, and he timidly extended his hand. "Senior, Junior doesn't have any news, but Junior has a strange treasure in my hands. I want to show it to Senior. Are you interested?" The more he spoke, the softer his voice became. In the end, he consciously stopped talking and looked at the young man in front of him with unease. This senior clearly said he came here to collect strange news, and not to exchange for items. His behavior was already considered a violation of the rules. If this senior got angry, then sure enough, when he heard what he said, the young scholar slightly furrowed his brows. However, in the next moment, his gaze still fell on the man's hand. This was a translucent red, sparkling and translucent stone that emitted a faint spiritual aura. For aura refining cultivators, this was indeed a treasure. However, for a core formation cultivator, this spiritual aura was a bit too weak. The young scholar was about to speak when he suddenly noticed something. He reached out and picked up the stone in the man's hand. After carefully examining it, he said, "This is fire obsidian. It can't be considered too valuable, and it's also a bit too small. However, its quality isn't bad, so it has some value. Hearing what he said, the man was delighted and promptly nodded. Senior has good eyes. When I took this stone to the shop to sell, they were only willing to pay 10 spirit stones. The shopkeeper didn't know what it was, so I never sold it. Senior, do you want it? The young scholar thought for a moment, then said, this thing is somewhat useful to me, so there's no harm in taking it. 10 spirit stones is indeed a bit low. With this kind of quality, it's probably worth about 100 spirit stones. Take a look. Do you want spirit stones or medicinal pills? About 100 spirit stones. The man was overjoyed. For a low-level cultivator like him, 100 spirit stones wasn't a small amount. However, when he looked at the several jade bottles and piles of spirit stones on the table, he gulped and cautiously said, Senior, can I exchange them for medicinal pills? The young scholar nodded. Of course you can. As he said that, he pushed one of the jade bottles towards the man. This bottle of medicinal pills is for aura refining cultivators to take. This bottle is worth about 180 spirit stones, so the value is about the same. Take it. Thank you, Senior, thank you, Senior. The man grabbed the jade bottle, put it into his chinquan bag, and repeatedly expressed his thanks. The young scholar waved his hand. Go. Then he raised his voice and said, Is there anyone else? Me. Seeing the man's encounter, some low-level cultivators who were originally just watching the fun also came forward. This senior was good-natured and generous. If they could exchange some medicinal pills worth a few spirit stones with him, they would definitely make a profit. Chapter 435. At sunset, the cultivators surrounding the tea house in Deepwater City finally dispersed in groups of 2s and 3s. The tea house's manager, an old cultivator with a grizzled beard, who was still in the early stage of the foundation building realm, came forward and asked respectfully, Senior, it's getting late. Do you need me to arrange a place for you? The young scholar stretched himself, picked up the folding fan on the table, and said, I'm looking for a place to stay. Sorry for troubling you. I don't dare. The manager hurriedly stepped aside. Senior's guidance has enlightened Junior. It's Junior's honor to do something for Senior. The manager was so respectful because before he came here, he gave this cultivator some pointers, allowing this cultivator, who didn't have much time left to live, to feel the meaning of cultivation again. For cultivators, even if their lifespans were about to end, it was a good thing if their cultivation level could advance. Maybe they could have a breakthrough with a moment of enlightenment, and some other opportunities. Our tea house has a place for distinguished guests to rest. If Senior doesn't mind, you can rest here. What do you think? The young man nodded with a smile, expressing his agreement. When the shopkeeper saw this, he respectfully invited him into the backyard, and as he walked he said, Senior, there's a small courtyard behind us, and it's usually for distinguished guests to stay in. Senior will absolutely not be disturbed here. The young man smiled. That would be best. The manager led the young man to the small courtyard in the back. After a brief introduction, and seeing that the young man was satisfied, the manager finally retreated with relief. Retreating to the entrance of the courtyard, the shopkeeper saw that an extremely powerful restriction had been set up in the courtyard. He wiped his sweat and said, Senior, you don't look old, but your cultivation is so high. You are truly a genius. When the surrounding restrictions were completely opened, the young man touched the space between his eyebrows, summoning a sparkling and translucent bead. After several breaths, he suddenly disappeared from the room. This young man was naturally Emotienga. After entering the virtual sky world, Emotienga withdrew the appearance-mimicking technique and restored her original appearance. She then sat on a praying mat and closed her eyes to rest. Nie Wushang's appearance-mimicking technique was indeed extraordinary. After transforming, even she herself couldn't recognize her, let alone these low-level cultivators. With the strengthening effect of the spirit-concealing pendant, she reckoned even middle-stage nascent soul cultivators wouldn't be able to see through her disguise. This was enough. It was not easy to see a late nascent soul cultivator. After resting for a while and feeling full of energy, Emotienga took out a small bag and poured out a pile of things. This was her harvest for the day. Although it was not valuable, there were some peculiar things that were rather interesting. After all, there weren't many strange things. Many low-level cultivators exchanged some rare items with her. She found the items quite interesting, so she exchanged them. In any case, what these cultivators wanted were mostly medicinal pills for aura refining or foundation building cultivators, or low-grade spirit tools and magic tools. To her, those were the most useless things. Even if she wanted to sell them, she'd find it troublesome. Emotienga picked up a fiery red stone from the pile of things. This was the fire obsidian stone that was exchanged from the hands of a low-level cultivator. Because of this incident, those low-level cultivators, regardless of whether they had valuable items in their hands or not, would just take out their items to exchange with her. In fact, there was nothing special about this fire obsidian stone. With this quality, it could only be sold for about 100 spirit stones in the celestial pole. Although it wasn't cheap, it wasn't rare either. The reason why she made the exchange was because she had never seen this thing since she arrived in Yunzhong. When she went shopping in Guifang City, a shop assistant told her he had never seen this thing before. Only then did she realize that fire obsidian might be a specialty of the celestial pole and couldn't be found in Yunzhong. But now, she actually saw this thing in the hands of a low-level cultivator. Furthermore, these cultivators didn't know what this thing was, so this was a bit strange. This was the seaside, and this sea area was the natural moat between the celestial pole and Yunzhong. If fire obsidian was really a specialty of the celestial pole, didn't that mean someone crossed the South Sea and lost fire obsidian here? Of course, this was only a guess. She had no way of knowing the truth. In addition, it wasn't like she didn't gain anything today. Although most of the so-called strange things in this small town were trivial matters, with so many people here, there were bound to be some people who heard some ancient legends. For example, an old aura refining cultivator whose lifespan was about to run out told her that when he was a child, he once heard a story about a celestial mountain appearing in the sea from his elders. Emotienga originally thought it was just a mirage, so she didn't pay too much attention to it. However, after listening to the old cultivator's story, she finally realized it wasn't that simple. The old cultivator said that at that time, all the fishermen and cultivators who hunted sea beasts for a living saw that celestial mountain. It suddenly appeared like a small island, and someone crossed the sea from it to trade some things with them. However, the seaside residents couldn't approach this celestial mountain. There seemed to be a dense fog around it, preventing people from advancing. Experienced cultivators said this was an illusory formation. This celestial mountain existed for about half a month before it disappeared as if it had never appeared. Emotienga thought about it carefully and felt that this so-called celestial mountain was very likely a high-level cultivator's magic weapon. An independent space like the virtual sky world was admittedly a heaven-defying existence that even deification cultivators would find difficult to obtain. However, portable immortals caves weren't that rare. It was just that they cost a lot, so very few people had them. These portable immortals caves were usually made to look like magic weapons. After they were used, they would turn into something: a mountain, a tower, a boat, or even a house. After they transformed, their owners could move in. The principle was also very simple. Many cultivators in the core formation realm and above used flying magic weapons that weren't conspicuous when taken out. Once they were used, they would turn into carriages or boats. For example, Lord Daoist Jingha's cloud carriage was such a magic weapon. However, such a portable immortals cave was much more expensive than a cloud carriage. Even for a cultivation group disciple like her who didn't lack spirit stones, it was still a sky-high price. Even Lord Daoist Jingha probably wouldn't be willing to part with it. In addition, the required materials and techniques were also very rare. Even if one could afford it, there might not be anyone who could make it. Therefore, many high-level cultivators knew about this thing, but very few people had it. Why couldn't the spirit stones used to make a portable immortals cave be used for something else? Buying medicinal pills and materials could greatly improve one's cultivation level. What was the use of such a portable immortals cave without the support of spirit veins? It would cost a lot of spirit stones to maintain it on a daily basis. Its function was nothing more than making it more convenient to go out. In short, this thing cost a lot, but the benefits weren't very high. Unless one was extremely rich, very few people would make such a thing. The immortal mountain this old cultivator mentioned was very likely a high-level cultivator's portable immortal's cave. He came here, stayed for several days, then left again. However, it was unclear whether this high-level cultivator came from the South Sea, or if he was a local cultivator from Yunzhong who passed through here. After she sorted out the information she heard today, Mo Tiange regretfully discovered that there wasn't much valuable information. However, she was already mentally prepared for this, so she wasn't too disappointed. If the clues to return to the celestial pole were so easy to find, how could there have been no contact between the celestial pole and Yunzhong for so many years? Besides, the shortcut to return to the celestial pole wasn't necessarily at the seaside. Transporting formations, space cracks, and the like didn't have a concept of distance. For example, the undersea path Mo Yaoqing found could be said to be God's good fortune. It was already not easy to find one. With that thought in mind, Mo Tiange decided to stay in Deepwater City for 3 to 5 days, and then go south. She would go to all the major cultivation towns in eastern Tang. Then she would go to Nanzhou and the west. The west of Yunzhong had never been included in the sphere of influence, because the west was barren, and there were almost no spirit veins. There were only many barbarians and small countries. However, Mo Tiange didn't want to let go of any opportunities. If she still couldn't find any clues in Nanzhou, she could go to the west. After all, the more backward a place was, the more legends there were. Just like that, Mo Tiange adjusted her breath in the virtual sky world for one night. The next day, Mo Tiange, still in the appearance of a young scholar, went out of the small courtyard where she temporarily lived, set up a table and chairs in the tea house, and began to collect strange news. After the first day of spreading the news, more people came today. However, most of them didn't have anything valuable in their hands. Although Mo Tiange didn't mind exchanging with low-level cultivators, she didn't accept everything. She rejected the ordinary things one by one, and only accepted some novel and interesting things. These cultivators originally came to try their luck. Although they were somewhat disappointed, they didn't think much of it, and continued to watch the fun from the side. In addition to these low-level ore refining cultivators, there were also some foundation-building cultivators who heard yesterday's news and came to ask for advice. Most of these people offered one or two valuable things, or mentioned some information, which made Mo Tiange gain quite a lot. She also knew that most of these foundation-building cultivators didn't have high aptitudes and only advanced to the foundation-building realm after going through untold hardships. They usually didn't have anyone to guide them, so they took a lot of detours, just like Second Uncle. When she thought of Second Uncle, she was even more kind to these foundation-building cultivators, and wouldn't be stingy if she could give them a few pointers. Several days later, although there were still a lot of people watching the fun, the number of ore refining cultivators who came to exchange for things decreased. On the contrary, there were more and more foundation-building cultivators. In such a small city, there naturally weren't many foundation-building cultivators among the individual cultivators. Most of these people were disciples from small cultivation groups and schools nearby. Some only had 1 or 2 core formation elders, and some cultivation groups didn't have any core formation cultivators at all. Usually, they didn't have anyone to guide them in their cultivation. When they learned that a senior came to Deepwater City, they all took the opportunity to come and ask for advice. Some people even prepared generous gifts, wanting to invite her to their homes as guests. Regarding this, Mo Tiange naturally refused. She didn't rely on her high cultivation level to make money. These foundation-building cultivators also knew that it wasn't practical for such a senior, with a profound cultivation level, to come to their cultivation group as a guest, so they didn't insist. They still offered generous gifts as long as she gave them some pointers. Regarding this, Mo Tiange wasn't polite and didn't hide anything. She accepted the gifts and gave them her advice with all her might. Later on, some core formation cultivators came to invite her. Emotienga still refused to go to their homes as guests, but she politely chatted with these core formation cultivators in the VIP tea rooms and traded goods with them. In the process, she made many new friends. Just like that, she stayed in Deepwater City for 7 or 8 days before she finally finished everything and set off again. Chapter 436. In the blink of an eye, another 10 years had passed. In these 10 years, Emotienga traveled all over Yunzhong. Starting from the small town in the north, she visited all the towns and cities in eastern Tang State that were just beginning to take shape. She then went to Nanzhou State and witnessed the peculiar phenomenon of Buddhism and Confucianism coexisting. Finally, she went to the west and lived in the barbarian land for several years. She made friends with those barbarians and heard many strange legends. During these 10 years, she used the name Yi Xiaotian to make a name for herself. Most of the high-level cultivators in eastern Tang and Nanzhou were friends with her. They all said she had a profound cultivation level, was straightforward, and was a person worth befriending. Some people coveted her because she was young and had a lot of treasures, but they were all killed by her. 10 years passed in a flash. She suddenly looked back and found that her gains from traveling in Yunzhong in these 10 years were more than her gains from cultivating in the virtual sky world in several decades. The more places she went, the more things she heard. Now, her understanding of Yunzhong was much deeper than many cultivators in Yunzhong. 10 years of trials and tribulations, and 10 years of experience, broadened her horizons, and unexpectedly, gave her a deeper understanding of Emo Yaoqing's cultivation experience. Back then, Emo Yaoqing's cultivation level was completely destroyed. She hid in the secular world and wandered in Yunzhong. She suffered a lot and finally reached the nascent soul realm. This experience gave her a lot of insights, which she wrote down in her cultivation notes. Although Emotienga experienced a lot in the past, she didn't have as deep an understanding as Emo Yaoqing. It wasn't until now, when she walked the path Emo Yaoqing once walked, saw the things Emo Yaoqing saw, and heard the legends Emo Yaoqing heard, that experience slowly integrated into her thoughts and became her own. Emotienga was originally a person with excellent aptitude and a very stable mind. She also didn't lack panaceas. After integrating these experiences, even if she only cultivated step by step every day and didn't enter closed-door meditation, her cultivation level still progressed at a rapid pace. During these 10 years, her cultivation level in the late stage of the core formation realm not only stabilized, but also reached the peak of the late stage. She was only a step away from the peak stage of the core formation realm. Having reached this realm, Emotienga was no longer in a hurry. As long as nothing unexpected happened, and she continued to cultivate steadily, it was inevitable for her to form her nascent soul before she was 200 years old. At that time, she could rely on her tyrannical strength to cross the South Sea and return to the celestial pole. In the past 10 years, as expected, she didn't find a shortcut to return to the celestial pole. For this reason, she could only make plans. If there was still no hope at the last moment, she would cross the South Sea by force. With this goal in mind, she spent the next few years inquiring about the South Sea. The South Sea of the Celestial Pole was also known as the North Sea in Yunzhong, and very few people knew about it. Although this sea wasn't as mysterious as the Sea of Returning Ruins, it was far more dangerous. Even the core formation cultivators, who were on good terms with her, didn't know much about it. There were a few seniors who had seen the dangers of the sea, but when they mentioned it, they all shook their heads. They said that if one wasn't a nascent soul cultivator with profound cultivation, they would most likely not be able to return safely after entering the sea. Emotienga didn't give up hope. After a few years, she didn't gain nothing. For example, there was a kind of tree in Yunzhong called iron heartwood. This tree grew for 1,000 years and turned into black iron heartwood. This black iron heartwood was extremely tough. Not only was it impervious to ordinary iron, but even spells couldn't harm it. If it was used as a boat, it could resist gales and huge waves. After learning about this, she went deep into the land of the Western continent and finally found a black iron heartwood. She pondered about casting this wood into a boat. In addition to her own affairs, the situation in Yunzhong changed in the past 10 years was also quite interesting. First, Mount Baifu seized the holy relic, the inescapable net, and its momentum rose greatly. Second, Joyen Sek's holy relic, the soul-restraining bead, began to be known by everyone. Third, Nameless Bead appeared not long ago, which caused another competition. So, together with the Heavenly Devil Tower from several decades ago, 4 out of the 5 holy relic appeared one after another. Because of this, the news that the 5th holy relic was the Fuxing sword was no longer a secret. Several core formation cultivators who saw the Fuxing sword were very annoyed. They actually watched the holy relic slip away in front of them. Later, the news that the Fuxing sword fell into the hands of a female cultivator from the outer endless sea, Qinwei, spread throughout Yunzhong. This unknown cultivator from the outer endless sea, who came from afar, suddenly became the most popular figure in Yunzhong. Many sects began to track down Qinwei's whereabouts. Among them, Juyan sect, Huayan Temple, and Guifang City were the most eager. These 3 sects watched Qinwei slip away right under their noses. Unfortunately, this Qinwei seemed to have disappeared in Yunzhong. No matter how they searched, they couldn't find any trace of her. Even nascent soul experts couldn't find her. Therefore, some people said that this Qinwei wasn't from Yunzhong. Perhaps she had already returned to the outer endless sea? Many people believed this news, but only the people of Juyan sect were suspicious. Because their sect master, Ling Yunhe, knew that the matter she entrusted to him was no small matter. Before she left, she should have come to ask for the reward. However, they couldn't find her anywhere. So in the end, they could only believe her. The high-level cultivators of Juyan sect couldn't help but sigh. Although this Qinwei was only a core formation female cultivator, her willpower and decisiveness were extraordinary. They were afraid that after she found out she had the Fuxing sword, she immediately gave up the benefits she was about to obtain and ran far away. Some of these things were known to Emotienga, but some were unknown to her. What she knew was that she had already become a key figure that cultivators in Yunzhong couldn't find. However, after changing her appearance, she didn't plan to get involved. Her illusory technique was very successful. Many core formation cultivators in Yunzhong recognized a late-stage core formation cultivator called Yi Xiaotian, but they didn't know that this young scholar was Qinwei, who stirred up a huge storm in Yunzhong. What she didn't know was that her disappearance made the nascent soul big shots in Yunzhong so angry that they secretly gritted their teeth. For out of the 5 legendary holy relic had appeared in the past few decades. If they could gather all 5, they could go to returning ruins, see to explore it, and maybe they could find the path to the deification realm. Unfortunately, this Qinwei disappeared with the Fuxing sword, causing their plan to completely fall through. After all, the 5 holy relic had disappeared for almost 100,000 years before they reappeared in the world. If they missed this chance, they didn't know when they would get another one. At that time, no matter how high their cultivation levels were, they would become a pile of bones. Just like that, Emotienga became a thorn in the eyes of the nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong. Master Immortal. A clear and melodious voice came from behind her. Emotienga stopped and turned around. She saw a young girl wearing Western clothes running towards her. The silver bracelets on her wrist jingled, and every step she took was a musical note. Master Immortal. The young girl stopped in front of her, raised her rosy cheeks, and looked at her. Are you leaving already? Emotienga smiled, and looked at the young girl in front of her. Ai, why did you come? The young girl lowered her head and grabbed her braid. After a while, she raised her head again, and looked at Emotienga with her bright eyes. Master Immortal, I'll go with you, okay? Emotienga was stunned. You, Master Immortal. The young girl's face was shy, but also determined. I like you, so I want to go with you. Emotienga smiled bitterly, and couldn't help but touch her face. This wasn't the first time she encountered this kind of situation. In the past 10 years, she traveled to many places, and there were often women who confessed their feelings to her, which really made her not know whether to laugh or cry. When she dressed up as a woman, although there were also men who had feelings for her, they never expressed their love to her. However, she used the appearance-changing technique to disguise herself as a man, and from time to time, she would attract some peach blossoms. This puzzled her no matter how she thought about it. Could it be that she was more suitable to be a man? Or that she was too successful in disguising herself as a man, and her appearance was too handsome? But she definitely wouldn't transform into an old man. I can't take you with me, she said. You should go back. This is your home. Why? The Western Continent girl, widened her eyes. We Western Continent women will leave home when we have someone we like. But she paused and said gently and indifferently, but I don't have any feelings for you, so I can't take you with me. Huh. Such a straightforward refusal stunned Ai. After a while she finally found her voice. Master Immortal, you don't like me at all? Didn't you say I was very cute? You also said you were happy with me. Emotinga was stunned. Did this make her misunderstand? In other words, she lost her sense of propriety. In her heart, she still thought of herself as a woman. So when she said these words, she didn't think it would cause other people to misunderstand. She sighed. Cute and love are not the same. I go back. We won't see each other again. After she finished speaking, she turned around, waved her sleeves, turned into a flight light, and rushed away. Master Immortal. The young girl was very anxious. Her silver bracelets jingled as she hurriedly chased after her. But how could a mortal's power resist an immortal's technique? Soon she could no longer find that flight light. She couldn't help but squat on the ground and cry. Emotinga's sleeves fluttered as she landed on a mountain. Listening to the young girl's crying, she couldn't help but sigh. She flicked her sleeves and sat down cross-legged. This was the Western Continent, the most dangerous place in Yunzhong. It was barren and unruly and resources were scarce. Sitting on this mountain and looking around, all she could see were bare yellow stones. It was difficult to find any trace of green. The people living here struggled against the heavens, the earth, and the beasts, surviving with difficulty. Perhaps it was such a harsh environment that gave them tenacious faith. The people here were all brave and simple. After a long time, the young girl's crying gradually stopped. She finally stood up and walked back silently. Emotinga stared at her until her silhouette disappeared. Although she couldn't accept it, such a persistent and passionate feeling made her burn. Spring flowers fell, autumn wind blew, summer lotus bloomed, and winter sleeps. Time didn't stop. Year after year, in the blink of an eye, 50 years had passed. When she came to Yunzhong, she never thought she would not return for 50 years, nor did she think it would be difficult to find the way back. When they were together, she always felt that between them, there was only this kind of ordinary but long-lasting feeling. But at this time, because of this Western Continent girl, she suddenly realized that deep in her heart, there was also this kind of love. This love wasn't strong, but it was mellow like wine. The longer it was stored in her heart, the deeper it became. It's time to go back, she whispered. Her harvest in the past 10 years had exceeded her expectations. Maybe she should find a place to enter closed-door meditation, advance to the peak stage, and enter the nascent soul realm in one fell swoop. In this way, she could rely on her profound cultivation level to cross the South Sea. She clenched her hands and made a decision. Chapter 437. For mortals, the Western Continent was a barren land, full of ferocious beasts, not a suitable place to live. Naturally, it was also not a good place to play. Moreover, it was barren, so even merchants would not come here. For cultivators, there were no excellent spiritual veins in the Western Continent, let alone heavenly treasures, spirit beasts, and spirit grasses. Therefore, unless they were looking for some strange things, they would not set foot in the Western Continent. But these things weren't important to Emotinga. Sitting on the top of this desolate mountain in the Western Continent, feeling the biting cold wind blowing, the vast and distant aura blowing on his face. For hundreds of thousands of years, other than a small number of barbarians, there were no traces of other people here. It still maintained the ancient style, and her thoughts easily entered it. She sat cross-legged and closed her eyes, feeling the howling wind blowing past her ears, as well as the distant cave dwellings and the melodious chants of the barbarians. I might as well go into seclusion here. A thought popped up in her mind. Although there were no spirit veins here, she had the virtual sky world, so it wouldn't be a problem. With this thought in mind, he decided to meditate on the spot. Doing this couldn't increase her spiritual aura, but the gains in her mental state were far from what she gained in the virtual sky world. The wind of the western continent was rough, just like the imperial sky and the queen of earth here, vast and distant, as if it came from the ancient times, without the noise of the mortal world, and without the competition of interests. Gradually, his heart melted with the wind, drifting with the wind towards the ancient world. The golden crow descended, the jade rabbit rose from the east, day and night alternated. Time passed day by day. The wind swept up the yellow soil, and gradually buried the person sitting cross-legged on the mountaintop. This meditation lasted for half a month. Emotienga woke up from her meditative state, and stared at the yellow soil piled on her body. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If she continued to meditate for a few more months, when she woke up, she was afraid that others would think of her as a desolate grave. Fortunately, this was not a problem for cultivators. She gently shook her sleeves, and the yellow soil was blown away by the wind. Her clothes were as good as new, and there was not a speck of dust on her face. She sat down cross-legged at the top of the mountain with a smile on her face. She felt extremely relaxed. In this half a month, her mental state once again had some insights. These insights allowed her to have a deeper understanding of Emo Yaoqing's cultivation experience. If that's the case, it wouldn't be a problem for him to reach the peak of the nascent soul realm. Of course, if he wanted to go into seclusion, there were still many things that he had to resolve. For example, stabilizing one's realm, guarding one's state of mind, as well as various medicinal pills that could stimulate one's advancement, as well as some protective measures. Forming one's nascent soul was different from forming one's core. If one's core shattered and failed to form one's nascent soul, one's cultivation would be crippled. Therefore, if something went wrong, she had to end her nascent soul formation before her golden core broke. Once her golden core broke, she had to succeed in her nascent soul formation. She didn't want to cultivate from the beginning. That would be much more difficult than what she was doing now. After sitting for a while, she took out a sword from her chinquan bag. This sword was simple, heavy, and had a restrained brilliance. The sound of wind and thunder could be faintly heard, but there was a strand of devilish qi that couldn't be dispersed coiled around it. Emotienga sighed as she stared at the sword. This was the Fuxing sword that made Qinwei, the target that every cultivator in Yunzhong wanted to kill in recent years. All these years, it wasn't that she didn't want to uncover the secret of the Fuxing sword, but no matter how much she pondered, the Fuxing sword remained the same. She didn't know what material this sword was made of. Not only was it incomparably tough, but even divine sense couldn't penetrate its interior. Therefore, she couldn't figure out to what extent this sword had been corroded by the devilish qi. Although the ancient records of the virtual sky world said that the spirit-quenching water could wash away all devilish qi and impurities, this thing was hard to find in the world, and there were no clues about it. However, in the past few years, she heard a lot of rumors. Among them, there was one that most core formation cultivators agreed on. The so-called 5 holy objects. Their power as magic weapons wasn't important. What was important was that they were the keys to the secret hidden in the Sea of Returning Ruins. Among these core formation cultivators, there were many disciples from big cultivation groups. Emotienga pondered. Now that the 5 holy objects were widely known in Yunzhong, this rumor was very likely to be true. But the problem was, even if it was true, how could she use this Fuxing sword? These 5 holy objects were the keys to a certain secret place in the Sea of Returning Ruins. Did this mean that the 5 holy objects had to be combined into one to become the real key? If that was the case, in order to solve this secret, either the 5 holy objects belonged to one force, or the 5 people with the holy objects were like the 5 saints in the past. They had equal strength and chose to cooperate. So troublesome. She looked at the Fuxing sword and sighed. The first one was needless to say. She was just a small core formation cultivator. How could she get all 5 holy objects? She'd probably be killed by a nascent soul cultivator as soon as she showed up. As for the second option, if they were in the celestial pole, it would be completely feasible. She had Xianqing school backing her up, so no one could underestimate her. However, this was Yunzhong. She had no roots or foundation here. So what right did she have to occupy a position of cooperation? Unless Master and Senior Marshal Brother were here. Once this thought emerged, she couldn't help but smile bitterly. In this current situation, she couldn't even go back. So how could they appear? What a pity. If she had two nascent soul cultivators as her backing, she could definitely stand out and ask for a share of the loot. Now, however, she could only hide to avoid being killed and robbed. But she was absolutely unwilling to hand over the Fuxing sword. She obtained the Fuxing sword from someone else in a dignified manner. So why should she hand it over? These people couldn't solve the secret of the Sea of Returning Ruins. And she wouldn't lose anything. And, in that case, she'd take the Fuxing sword back to the Celestial Pole and concentrate on cultivating. When she was strong enough, she'd come to Yunzhong again. At that time, she'd have the power to fight. Just like that, she calmly made a decision. She'd take the Fuxing sword back to the Celestial Pole and let these cultivators fight to the death in Yunzhong. It wouldn't matter to her even if they died. Perhaps, when her cultivation base improved greatly, when she came to Yunzhong again, the strength of the high-level cultivators in Yunzhong would be greatly reduced due to the internal strife. At that time, she could openly share a piece of the pie with them, and even occupy more benefits. With that thought in mind, she reached out and touched the sharp blade of the Fuxing sword. A magic weapon from nearly 100,000 years ago, which had been corroded in the devil domain for so many years, still had this kind of momentum. Fu Yaozi's tool refining technique was really amazing, not to mention restoring the Fuxing sword's former glory. If she could learn a little bit of Fu Yaozi's tool refining technique and refine her magic weapon, the power of her magic weapon would definitely be greatly improved. Unfortunately, her current cultivation level wasn't enough to find the secret of the Fuxing sword. After thinking about these things, she was about to put the Fuxing sword away when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest, as if a needle had been ruthlessly stabbed into her heart, almost making her lose consciousness in a split second. Ugh! She covered her chest and explored her heart meridian with her spiritual aura, only to find that her heart meridian was completely normal. There was no problem at all. Then she felt another sharp pain. This time, she even fainted for several breaths before she recovered. What's going on? In a trance, she suddenly realized what had happened. The one who was injured wasn't her but Qinshi. There was a blood oath between them, so they could sense each other's condition. When they were fine, this kind of feeling was very weak. But if there was a strong feeling, it meant one of them was seriously injured. She panicked as she realized this. Such a strong feeling actually made her faint for a moment, even though she was thousands of miles away. What kind of injury did Qinshi suffer? Would his life be in danger? Strange. He'd already advanced into the nascent soul realm, and his divine power was powerful. What kind of danger did he encounter that made him seriously injured? She tried hard to breathe and calm herself down. Emotinga closed her eyes and continued to sense Qinshi's condition. Although it wasn't as painful as before, the feeling of pain came in waves and didn't stop. What was he doing? Was he fighting with someone or a demonic beast? Where's Master? Did he go to some dangerous place again? Her mind was in a mess, and she almost couldn't suppress her fear. After being separated for 50 years, she was looking forward to reuniting with him. But now another burst of pain came. Emotinga covered her chest, feeling that her blood and qi were surging. She couldn't suppress it. Originally, the feeling of the blood oath wasn't this strong, but she was panicking now, which caused her blood and qi to become unstable. After enduring for a while, she finally felt a sweetness in her throat, and a mouthful of blood came up. Blood flowed from the corner of her mouth and dripped on the Fuxing sword in her hand. The shiny sword suddenly shone with a dazzling light. Emotinga was stunned. Before she could react, the Fuxing sword shone brightly and swallowed her whole body. She seemed to be hit hard in the head, and she fainted. Her surroundings were gray, and her divine sense was lost. She felt like she was dead, but she also felt like she was alive. Senior Marshall brother. She recalled the strange scene before she fainted, and the reason she vomited blood. She couldn't help but feel anxious. Was he still alive? She sensed that the blood oath didn't seem to be broken. In other words, he should still be alive. Thinking of this, she calmed down. As long as he was alive, it was fine. He would definitely find a way to escape. The problem now was that she seemed to be in trouble herself. She wasn't unfamiliar with this feeling. In fact, this kind of coma was caused by her divine sense being sucked into her sea of consciousness. But the problem was why? Her blood was absorbed by the Fuxing sword, and then her divine sense was sucked in. Could it be that the Fuxing sword was hiding some secret? Just as she thought about this, she suddenly heard a soft sigh coming from the gray space. Immediately, her hair stood on end. This was her sea of consciousness, and every corner of it was under her control. How could there be someone else's sigh? Who? She was on guard. Although she was in the weakest sea of consciousness, she had cultivated the soul refining art to a certain level, so she had the power to fight back. However, the sea of consciousness was fragile. This person could sneak into her sea of consciousness without a sound, so his strength must be extraordinary. She calmed down and said, "Who are you? Why are you in my sea of consciousness?" Alas! Another soft sigh sounded, but it was clearer than the last time. As if sensing her hostility, this person finally spoke. "You actually have the spiritual roots of the origin, and you even cultivated the body of the origin. It seems you're indeed my fated person." Emotinga was stunned. There was no hostility in this person's words. There was even a sense of affection. The Fuxing sword, the fated person. She was shocked. "You're Fu Yaozi?" In the gray space, the person chuckled softly. "You're really smart, baby." "Yes, I'm Fu Yaozi." Chapter 438. Emotinga was stunned for a long time. Wasn't this similar to when she met Emo Yaoqing when she was a child? However, she was no longer an ordinary village girl now, so she quickly made her own judgment. Fu Yaozi must have left some kind of restriction on the Fuxing sword, and her blood just happened to trigger the restriction, which led to such a thing happening. However, Fu Yaozi's divine sense was able to enter her sea of knowledge with the help of a foreign object. His method was really amazing. She was already a core formation cultivator now, so the sea of knowledge was the most secretive thing. Even nascent soul cultivators couldn't enter it easily. So it's Senior Fu Yaozi. The cultivators in Yunzhong all said that Fu Yaozi not only had a profound cultivation level, but he was also an admirable person. If it was someone else, Emotinga would have to be cautious to prevent others from attacking her sea of knowledge. But since it was Fu Yaozi, she felt a little relieved. Why did Senior enter my sea of knowledge? Even so, she still raised her guard. Did Senior attach his divine sense to the Fuxing sword? Yes. Fu Yaozi's voice was gentle and amiable. The Fuxing sword has the divine sense I sealed to wait for the fated person. You have the body of the origin, so you triggered the restriction. Body of the origin? Emotinga was secretly astonished. Could it be that this Senior Fu Yao also has spiritual roots of the origin? Otherwise, why would he need the body of the origin to be his fated person? Let's talk about this later, Fu Yaozi said gently. Junior, this divine sense was sealed before I left the Sea of Returning Ruins. I wonder how long has it been since my era? And has my original body passed away? The Sea of Returning Ruins? Does that mean Fu Yaozi was still in the nascent soul realm at that time? Emotinga thought to herself. She calmed down and answered, Senior, according to the rumors in Yunzhong, you didn't pass away. Instead, you advanced to the soul formation realm and left this world. Oh, Fu Yaozi was a little surprised. Then he said, in that case, the rumors are true. Rumors? Emotinga was confused. Although Fu Yaozi sounded a little surprised, he didn't sound very surprised. In other words, when he sealed this divine sense, he already had the hope of advancing to the soul formation realm? Fu Yaozi didn't answer and continued to ask, then what era is it now? Emotinga answered, according to legend, you've been in the deification realm for almost 100,000 years. 100,000 years? Fu Yaozi paused for a moment then sighed. It's actually been so long. If that's the case, everything has already become a legend. You're right, Emotienga said. Although everyone in Yunzhong knows about Fu Yaozi now, very few people know about his deeds. Fu Yaozi sighed and asked, "What about you? Junior, who are you, and how did you obtain this Fuxing sword?" This question made Emotienga hesitate for a moment. After thinking about it, she felt that Fu Yaozi was only a wisp of his divine comprehension, so there wasn't anything he couldn't say. Besides, he was in her sea of knowledge, so it would be very easy for him to know whether she was telling the truth or not. He said, "Junior is from the north of Yunzhong, a person of the celestial pole. Several decades ago, I crossed the sea and came to Yunzhong. Senior's Fuxing sword was said to have been lost in the infernal domain when you were fighting the 10 infernal monarchs. It had been corroded for tens of thousands of years, and was later brought out of the infernal domain by an infernal cultivator. Junior had obtained the Fuxing sword from him." "The infernal domain?" Fu Yaozi muttered. "No wonder there's a lingering devil aura in the Fuxing sword. So that's why." His words attracted Emotienga's attention. "Senior, the Fuxing sword has been corroded in the infernal domain for tens of thousands of years. But why isn't Senior affected at all?" As far as she knew, Dao and devils were innately in conflict. Fu Yaozi was a Dao cultivator, so his restrictions in the infernal domain would definitely be corroded like the Fuxing sword. But now, it seemed like Fu Yaozi's divine sense wasn't affected at all. Fu Yaozi smiled and said gently, "If it was so easily corroded by devil aura, my restrictions would be too useless." Emotienga thought to herself, in that case, Fu Yaozi's secret technique actually wasn't afraid of devil aura? This was really tempting. "Junior," Fu Yaozi said, "you said you're from the celestial pole?" "Yes," Emotienga answered. "The celestial pole is located in the north of Yunzhong, separated by a sea. However, that sea is really too dangerous. For more than 100,000 years, there's almost no one coming or going from there. Senior, with Senior's divine power, you should know about the celestial pole, right?" His words sounded like a compliment, but for a legendary figure like Fu Yaozi, this little compliment wasn't excessive. Others might not be able to do it, but he was known as the #1 cultivator in Yunzhong, so it wasn't strange for him to have this little bit of divine power. Sure enough, Fu Yaozi said, "I do know about the celestial pole. Years ago, I also crossed the sea. The North Sea is unpredictable, but a junior like you actually came to Yunzhong. It's really inconceivable. Presumably, you have some divine power and extremely good luck." Being praised by such a legendary figure, Emotienga was a bit embarrassed. She said, "To be honest, Junior didn't come to Yunzhong directly by crossing the sea. Junior found an undersea passage." "Oh." After Fu Yaozi recovered from his surprise, he smiled and said, "No wonder. It's really too dangerous for a core formation cultivator to cross the North Sea." Emotienga thought to herself, Nie Wushang actually crossed the South Sea by relying on her core formation cultivation level. But this matter wasn't important, so there was no need to mention it in front of Fu Yaozi. Fu Yaozi paused for a moment, then continued to say, "Whether you're a cultivator in Yunzhong or a cultivator in the celestial pole isn't important. Since you've awakened the restriction on the Fuxing sword, you're my fated person." Emotienga's curiosity was piqued when she heard Fu Yaozi mention the term fated person once again. She asked, "May I ask why Senior sealed his divine sense on the Fuxing sword? What does fated person mean? Also, Senior just said that Junior was able to awaken the restriction because I have the body of the origin. Senior, you..." There were countless questions in her mind. If the restriction on the Fuxing sword was triggered by blood, how could it last until today? Just like in the virtual sky world, her spiritual roots of the origin were the key. If the Fuxing sword was also like that, what about Fu Yaozi? Fu Yaozi chuckled and said slowly, "Junior, your guess is correct. I'm the same as you. I have the spiritual roots of the origin, and I've also cultivated the body of the origin. Therefore, the restriction on the Fuxing sword can only be triggered by cultivators with the body of the origin." As if sensing Emotienga's surprise, he said, "Don't worry, I'll tell you about it slowly. Fu Yaozi began to slowly tell her about his life. When he was a child, he was taken on the path of cultivation by an individual cultivator and set foot on the path to immortality. Just like her, no one knew he was a heaven-gifted genius. They only knew he had wasted spiritual roots with all 5 elements, so no cultivation group was willing to accept him as a disciple. In such an environment, Fu Yaozi cultivated with difficulty. He had a tenacious character, a firm will, and he was extremely intelligent. He often understood cultivation techniques at a glance. Although he lacked medicinal pills and medicine, and he didn't have a good cultivation environment, he still reached the foundation-building realm by relying on luck and temperament. When he reached the foundation-building realm, his cultivation level stagnated. For cultivators with 5 spiritual roots like him, even if they were extremely lucky and succeeded in building their foundation, they would generally stay in the foundation-building realm and would find it difficult to advance. However, at this time, his chance to become an immortal finally came. In the hands of a destitute cultivator, he obtained an incomplete cultivation technique, left behind, from the distant past era. This cultivation technique was the art of the origin, based on the theory of the origin. This art of the origin wasn't outstanding, and it was incomplete. The most terrible thing was that it wasn't suitable for the current cultivation environment. Therefore, although many cultivators with inferior spiritual roots had high hopes for it, in the end they couldn't practice it, so this cultivation technique became a useless one. Fu Yaozi obtained this cultivation technique at a very low price. Only then did he understand that his spiritual roots were called the spiritual roots of the origin, and that it was a heaven-gifted genius from the distant past era. After that, he began to carefully study this cultivation technique. It was also because of his amazing perception that, by relying on this incomplete art of the origin, he was actually able to comprehend the true cultivation path of the spiritual roots of the origin. From there, step by step, he slowly completed the cultivation technique. Because of this cultivation technique, he understood the cultivation environment of the distant past era. As it turned out, it was completely different from the current era. Naturally, he developed a strong interest in the distant past era and began to tirelessly explore the history of the distant past era and the distant past era. In order to explore these ancient legends, he went in and out of all kinds of secret places and obtained many natural treasures, allowing his cultivation level to advance rapidly. Moreover, because the Tao he embraced was completely different from others, he gradually made a big name for himself. Through Fu Yaozi's simple narration, Mo Tiange grasped a key point and asked, "Senior, the cultivators in Yunzhong all said the Tao you embraced was greatly different from others. Junior also heard about it, but I'm very puzzled. Why do you think cultivators should shoulder more responsibilities when they have power? This is completely inconsistent with the current cultivation world." Fu Yaozi chuckled and said, "I just said I explored the cultivation path of the distant past era and the distant past era, so it's naturally different from the current one." Mo Tiange was stunned. So the Tao of cultivators in the distant past era and the distant past era wasn't like this. Correct. Fu Yaozi said. To be exact, it's the Tao of the distant past era. In the distant past era, this kind of Tao has already declined, and in our era, no one knows about it. At this point, Fu Yaozi sighed. Back then, I didn't understand why there were no more cultivators who ascended to immortality in our current world. Was it simply because the spiritual aura wasn't strong enough? I don't think so. Later, as my cultivation level gradually increased, I came into contact with more and more secret places from the distant past era. Finally, I was sure it was related to Tao. Tao? Mo Tiange was shocked. Feifei once said the rules of the human world were different. Could it be the same as what Fu Yaozi said? If that was the case, wasn't the current cultivation world a deformed existence? Junior, you haven't reached the nascent soul realm yet, so you don't need to worry about this matter too much. After so many years, you're the only one who successfully triggered the restriction on the Fuxing sword, so you're my fated person. Let me ask you, are you willing to inherit my unfulfilled wish and continue the path I might not have finished? Emotienga took a deep breath. From what he said, Fu Yaozi seemed to be looking for a successor. If she agreed, would she be able to obtain this amazingly talented cultivator's inheritance? However, what did he mean by a path he might not have finished? As if sensing her confusion, Fu Yaozi said, "If you agree, you'll be my successor, and I'll teach you everything I've learned in my life. However, you have to promise me that you'll continue to explore the Tao of the distant past era and look for the truth of this cultivation world." Chapter 439. Fu Yaozi was said to be the #1 celestial cultivator in the clouds. He didn't belong to any sect, but he had a body full of amazing supernatural powers. He traveled through the clouds and fought against the 10 great demon monarchs alone, without being at a disadvantage. In the end, he turned into a deity and left, becoming an eternal legend in the clouds. How many people would be able to resist such a temptation when such a person said, "Become my successor"? Even a demonic cultivator would be willing to cripple his cultivation and start from scratch, right? Emotienga had to admit that she couldn't withstand this kind of temptation, especially since Fu Yaozi also had spiritual roots of the origin like her. Although she already had a master, this was not a problem. Even though she inherited Fu Yaozi's legacy, Xinqing School was still her school, and Lord Daoist Jinghe was still her master. "Senior, this junior is very willing to be your successor," Emotienga said cautiously. "But what do you mean by finding the truth about the cultivation world?" "Heh," Fu Yaozi chuckled. "What does the primordial era look like? Why did God leave the world? Why did demons, immortals, and demons have to be separated? Why were the primordial era and the ancient era destroyed? What was the difference between the righteousness of ancient times and the righteousness of today? Why had no one ascended after so many years? Is our method of cultivation really correct?" He paused and asked, "Don't you want to know these questions?" Emotienga was silent. Fu Yaozi's questions were all questions that she couldn't answer right now, and they weren't things that she could find the answers to in her current state. However, if one day she could form her nascent soul and reach the deification stage, then these would be the questions she would seek the answers to, because at that time, she would have to pursue the true meaning of the world and find a way to ascend. "Junior will explore these things sooner or later, but not now," Emotienga said. Fu Yaozi chuckled. "It looks like this old man did not misjudge you." After a pause, he said, "Since you have this ambition, then are you willing to be my successor?" Since the question was already asked, how could Emotienga still refuse? She said, "Junior is willing." Hearing her promise, Fu Yaozi smiled warmly and said, "Since that's the case, from now on, you're my Fu Yaozi's successor." Emotienga cleverly changed the way she addressed him. Disciple greets master. Right now, the two of them were in the sea of consciousness, just a wisp of divine sense. The so-called greeting was just a way of expressing their stance. Fu Yaozi naturally understood and said, "No need to be so polite." He paused for a moment and said, "Since you and I are master and disciple, then shouldn't you tell me about your matters?" Emotienga was stunned. Upon hearing this, Emotienga suddenly remembered that something like divine sense would dissipate one day after it left the body. Although some divine senses could be stored for a long time, they couldn't exist forever. She didn't dare to waste any more time, and began to tell Fu Yaozi everything about her. Fu Yaozi asked very carefully, from the moment she stepped on the path of cultivation to when she traveled to Yunzhong, he asked about everything in detail, especially about the art of the origin. When he heard that Emotienga met 2 deification cultivators and obtained the art of the origin from there, he couldn't help but sigh at her good luck. Although many nascent soul cultivators knew about the existence of deification cultivators in this world, only a few of them had actually met one. For some reason, after cultivators reached the deification realm, they would choose to leave the world and no longer interact with the world. Perhaps their cultivation levels had reached the peak, so the things in this world could no longer attract them. Emotienga was indeed very lucky to be able to obtain the art of the origin bestowed by a deification cultivator. She wasn't like him, who only had an incomplete cultivation technique, and had to go through untold hardships to explore secret places left behind from the distant past era, before his cultivation level could advance step by step. He talked about it for a whole day. This was the first time Emotienga recalled her life so carefully. Now that she thought about it again, she had a different experience. It was as if she was watching other people's lives as an outsider. After he finished talking, the Fuxing sword fell silent. Emotienga waited for a long time, but Fu Yaozi didn't say anything. She couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy and called out, "Master." "N." A faint voice came from the Fuxing sword. "Is there something wrong with what disciple experienced?" Fu Yaozi was silent for a while, then said, "That's not it. It's just that the art of the origin you practiced was taught by a deification cultivator. So I don't know what else I can teach you." The art of the origin Zhong Muling taught her was a complete set. Coupled with Zhong Muling's own modifications, it was naturally extraordinary. As for Fu Yaozi, although there were rumors in Yunzhong that he had also reached the deification realm, this divine sense was left behind when he was in the nascent soul realm. His cultivation technique naturally couldn't compare to the one Zhong Muling taught her. After a while, Fu Yaozi said, "That being the case, I won't teach you the art of the origin. However, I can teach you some cultivation experiences and divine abilities in fights of magical powers." Emotienga was overjoyed. She had Zhong Muling's Taiyuan record and Emo Yaoqing's art of Sunu, so she didn't have any desire for cultivation techniques. As for Fu Yaozi, rumor had it that his divine abilities ran amok in Yunzhong, and he could fight 10 devil monarchs alone when he was in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. If she could get his experience in fights of magical powers, her strength would definitely increase greatly. "Thank you, Master." "You don't have to thank me too early," Fu Yaozi said. Fu Yaozi said, "What I left behind is only a divine sense. My abilities aren't even half of my original bodies, so the things I can teach you are limited." Despite that, Emotienga wasn't disappointed. "Even if I can learn half of Master's divine abilities, I'll still benefit a lot. Besides, Disciple doesn't think I'm a stupid person. I also have my own divine abilities. As long as I can master Master's divine abilities, my strength will naturally increase. If I only learn Master's divine abilities, I'll be at a disadvantage." Oh, her words surprised Fu Yaozi, but he soon smiled and said, "You're really smart. Master is very pleased." After pondering for a while, Fu Yaozi said, "Your current cultivation level is only a step away from the peak stage of the core formation realm, but it's still not enough to advance to the nascent soul realm. During this period of time, Master will first help you reach the peak stage and stabilize your realm. After that, you can go to the Sea of Returning Ruins to find fated chances and enter the nascent soul realm in one go." The Sea of Returning Ruins? Upon hearing this, Emotienga couldn't help but recall the legend of the 5 saints. She couldn't help but ask, "Master, according to the rumor in Yunzhong, you and the other 4 seniors are collectively known as the 5 saints. Each of you passed down a treasure, which is the key to opening the secret place in the Sea of Returning Ruins, right?" "Oh, there are still people who know about this?" Fu Yaozi was a little surprised, but he soon said, "Yes, it's true. However, it's not as simple as the rumors say." Then, just as she was about to continue asking, Fu Yaozi interrupted her. "Let's talk about this later. When the time comes, Master will tell you. For now, you should improve your cultivation level. If you reach the peak stage of the core formation realm, with my help, you can go to the Sea of Returning Ruins." Emotienga swallowed the words she wanted to say and answered, "Yes." With the help of Fu Yaozi's divine sense, she would definitely be able to get a share of the secret place in the Sea of Returning Ruins, so there was no need to worry. Right now, it was better to be obedient and improve her strength first. In the following days, Fu Yaozi taught Emotienga his fighting divine abilities one by one. Emotienga returned to the virtual sky world and practiced according to his instructions. After learning about the existence of the virtual sky world, Fu Yaozi was very surprised. He repeatedly sighed at her heaven-defying fated chances. It was no wonder she had such a high cultivation level at such a young age. If he had such a fated chance back then, how could he have wasted so many years? In an environment full of spiritual aura like the virtual sky world, many of Fu Yaozi's experiences became a bit easier to cultivate. Time flowed like water. Under Fu Yaozi's guidance, Mo Tiange cultivated and learned divine abilities at the same time. Several years passed. During this period of time, Mo Tiange had never been so focused. In her cultivation career, she had never had someone to guide her. Even her master, Lord Taoist Jinghe, could only guide her slowly due to the limitations of his cultivation technique, and couldn't personally teach her. Occasionally when she was free, she would think about the reaction of the blood oath, and would feel anxious. Fortunately, the connection between them hadn't been broken, and she no longer had such a strong reaction. Presumably, Qin Shi's injuries had gradually healed, right? But she didn't know where he was now, or when she could go look for him. Chapter 440. She waved the heaven and earth fan, and countless immortal flowers and spiritual plants appeared out of thin air and circled in the air. Mo Tiange shouted softly, "Go!" The fragrant flowers and plants instantly emitted a fierce momentum, and the spiritual aura exploded, raising a lush slope to the ground. Not bad. Its power isn't great, but its control of spiritual aura is very exquisite. The voice in the Fuxing sword praised, "Your natal magic weapon is really marvelous. Your ancestor must have been a brilliant person to be able to think of such a magic weapon." Unfortunately, Mo Tiange had told Fu Yaozi about Mo Yaoqing, and he sighed with emotion after hearing her experience. Fu Yaozi was a strong-willed person, so he admired cultivators like Mo Yaoqing, who never gave up despite experiencing difficulties. He also heard that she, as a female cultivator, didn't want to be burdened by her appearance, and was very intelligent, so he admired her even more. Mo Tiange also sighed when she thought of Mo Yaoqing. Without her beauty, Mo Yaoqing would have become one of the famous great cultivators in Yunzhong. Unfortunately, her beauty not only didn't bring her any benefits, but it also harmed her life. Okay, you've grasped 50 to 60% of the wonders of this heaven and earth fan, so you've passed for the time being. 50 to 60%. Mo Tiange was surprised. Only 50 to 60%? Of course. Fu Yaozi's voice was still calm. This fan is your natal magic weapon, but it's hard for you to understand it with your current realm. It's already not bad for you to display 50 to 60% of its power. You'll only be able to display its full power when you reach the nascent soul realm. At this point, Fu Yaozi sighed again. Otherwise, with my ability, how could I easily admire others? Mo Tiange couldn't help but mutter in her heart. If he and Mo Yaoqing were born in the same era, he would have fallen in love with her, right? Unfortunately, the two of them were tens of thousands of years apart, so they couldn't meet. Speaking of which, although she didn't have as deep feelings for this master as Lord Taoist Jinghe, she still admired him after getting along with him for several years. He was kind, upright. If Mo Yaoqing had met such a person back then, she probably wouldn't have such prejudice against men. "Master, what should I do next?" "Cultivate," Fu Yaozi said. "These past few years, Master has already taught you a lot of magical techniques. Now, even if you were to face a nascent soul cultivator, you shouldn't be completely defenseless. What you lack the most right now is cultivation. If you can improve your cultivation, your strength will naturally increase." Mo Tiange nodded. There was no need to think about advancing to the nascent soul stage in a short period of time. Advancing to the nascent soul stage was not a simple matter. Even if everything was ready, it was normal to only have results after 10 or 20 years of seclusion. As for Fu Yaozi, he was only a wisp of divine consciousness. Although he could reside on the Fuxing sword, he could not wait until that moment. Mo Tiange quickly returned to the virtual sky world to enter closed-door meditation. Under Fu Yaozi's guidance, and with the help of various spiritual herbs, she was originally only a step away from completing the core formation realm. As long as there were no accidents, she would be able to advance within 2 to 3 years. While Mo Tiange was hiding in the desolate land of the Western continent, preparing to advance to the peak stage of the core formation realm. The whole of Yunzhong was turned upside down because of the whereabouts of Qin Wei. In eastern Tang's Juyin sect, 7 or 8 people gathered in the Immortals' Cave of the head Grand Supreme Elder, Master Taoist Yuan Mu. These people were either sitting or standing. Half of them were top nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong, while the other half were only in the core formation realm. The person sitting in the first position was naturally Master Taoist Yuan Mu, the head Grand Supreme Elder of Juyin sect. He was the cultivator with the highest cultivation level in Juyin sect, and one of the strongest among the late nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong. A sect that could become a big shot among the cultivation sects in Yunzhong was bound to have many talented and powerful cultivators. The reason why Juyin sect had occupied the title of the #1 cultivation group for so many years and never declined was because it never lacked late nascent soul cultivators, and its strength had always been at the top of Yunzhong's cultivators. This Master Taoist Yuan Mu was less than 1,000 years old, but he had long entered the late stage of the nascent soul realm. For so many years, he had always been one of the most powerful cultivators in Yunzhong. Sitting next to Master Taoist Yuan Mu was a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator who was about the same age as him. He was the ancestor of Sky Snow City's Ling clan Ling Shiyu. Although Ling Shiyu was only in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, and his strength couldn't be considered second in Juyin sect, he had a very good relationship with Master Taoist Yuan Mu, and was good at making friends with people of the same generation. So his status in Juyin sect was also extraordinary. As for the core formation cultivator standing behind Ling Shiyu, he was Ling clan's descendant Ling Yunha. In front of the head Grand Supreme Elder and the ancestor, even though Ling Yunha was the sect head of Juyin sect, he could only stand. Aside from these 3 Juyin sect hosts, the other people in the guest seats were monks and scholars, all dressed differently. Sitting on the left was an old monk with a white beard, white eyebrows and a kind face. If Emo Tiange was here, she would definitely recognize this old monk, whose eyes were always closed. He was revered Wu Ming. Behind him stood Wu Ming, who'd tried to rob her but lost the inescapable net. Sitting on the right was a fair-skinned, beardless young scholar in his 20s. This scholar was young, but he was already in the late stage of the nascent soul realm. His cultivation level was unfathomable. The core formation cultivator behind him looked like a middle-aged scholar. He was actually Han Shizhi, who once set up an ambush in Sky Snow City to snatch the Fuxing sword. 3 great late-stage nascent soul cultivators, representing the 3 great cultivation factions of Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism were now gathered together. If outsiders found out about this, they would definitely turn pale with fright. You too. Master Taoist Yuan Mu was the first to break the silence. He looked at the monk and the scholar and said, "What should we do about this matter? Today we have to come up with a plan. You can't just not take a stand." Upon hearing this, the young scholar put down the teacup he'd been holding and said with a smile, "Brother Taoist Yuan Mu, our righteous path has always been the leader of your sect. Regarding this matter, Brother Taoist should naturally take the lead." Revered Wu Ming, who'd been smiling like the Maitreya Buddha, just nodded without saying anything. Seeing this situation, Master Taoist Yuan Mu secretly frowned. Logically speaking, with Juyin sect's status in Yunzhong, he should have taken the lead and expressed his stance first. However, the attitude of these 2 old fellows made him unhappy. At a time like this, they just had to make him speak first. After pondering for a while, Master Taoist Yuan Mu finally opened his mouth. "Fellow Taoists, this matter is of great importance. It can be said that it affects the fortune of Yunzhong for 1,000 years. As the leaders of the 3 great factions of the righteous path, it's really not a good thing if we continue to make excuses. Why don't we tell each other about our plans and come up with a workable solution? What do you think?" Fellow Taoist Yuan Mu's words make sense. Revered Wu Ming was still smiling. He put his palms together and said, "Now that things have come to this, I'm sure none of our 3 sects are willing to give up this opportunity. If not for this, we wouldn't be sitting here together." The old monk's words finally made Master Taoist Yuan Mu feel a little better. He immediately said, "That's right. Since both of you have chosen to come to my Juyan sect to discuss this matter, I believe that both of you have the intention to cooperate, right? Hearing this, revered Wu Ming uttered the name of Buddha and nodded slightly. Seeing this, Master Taoist Yuan Mu turned to the young scholar. Mr. Yu, what about you? Naturally, the young scholar lightly waved the folding fan in his hand and said casually. On the surface, they had reached an intention to cooperate. Master Taoist Yuan Mu smiled. Since both of you have the same idea as me, then there's an explanation for this matter. After a pause, he said, both of you know that if we want to open that mysterious space, just the items in the hands of our three sects aren't enough. We also need to find the Heavenly Demon Tower and the supporting life sword. Revered Wu Ming nodded. The matter of the 5 saints was originally caused by the appearance of the Heavenly Demon Tower. However, we still don't know whose hands the Heavenly Demon Tower ended up in. What should we do? The young scholar surnamed Yu smiled faintly. The whereabouts of the Heavenly Demon Tower is easy to deal with. Oh, hearing this, Master Taoist Yuan Mu looked at him. What does Mr. Yu think? Scholar Yu said, no matter whose hands the Heavenly Demon Tower ends up in, it still needs to be used together with the other 4 holy items in order to be effective. Since that's the case, we just need to gather all the other holy items together, and the owner of the Heavenly Demon Tower will naturally appear. When he said this, everyone else couldn't help but nod. So the most important thing for us now is to find the supporting life sword. Everyone knows about the supporting life sword. For the past 10 years, all the major forces in Yunzhong have been searching for the whereabouts of that female cultivator from the outer endless sea. It can be said that everyone has turned Yunzhong upside down, but this female cultivator seems to have disappeared without a trace. Under such circumstances, everyone thinks that it's very likely that this woman has left Yunzhong and returned to her hometown, right? That's right. Master Taoist Yuan Mu nodded. It's been more than 10 years, and many forces in Yunzhong have been searching for her. But they actually haven't found a single clue. Unless this person isn't in Yunzhong, it's really hard to explain. But if we can't find the supporting life sword, we can't cooperate even if we want to. Scholar Yu's words caused everyone present to fall silent. None of the 5 holy items could be missing. This was the crux of the problem. Although the Heavenly Demon Tower had disappeared decades ago, everyone knew that it must still be in Yunzhong. It was just that the person who obtained it didn't want to publicize it. But this supporting life sword, it was hard to say. Since Mr. Yu said so, you should have already thought of a countermeasure, right? Ling Shiyu, who was sitting at the side, said. Scholar Yu still smiled faintly. He glanced at Ling Shiyu and nodded lightly. That's right. I have indeed thought about this for a long time. Although I haven't thought of a definite solution, I have some ideas. Master Taoist Yuan Mu was delighted. Mr. Yu, please speak frankly. Chapter 441. Mo Tiange opened her eyes, her face full of joy. She looked down at her hands, which were sparkling like jade and surrounded by spiritual aura. They were even richer than before. Fu Yaozi's praise came from the Fuxing sword. Not bad. In just 3 years, you've reached the peak stage of the core formation realm, and your realm is stable. Sure enough, your aptitude is extraordinary. Mo Tiange withdrew her spiritual aura and said, if it weren't for Master's guidance, disciple wouldn't have reached the peak stage so smoothly. Fu Yaozi chuckled, but didn't say anything. This wasn't a compliment. If it weren't for his guidance, with Mo Tiange's aptitude, it would have been almost impossible for her to advance so smoothly, even though it wouldn't have been a problem. During this advancement, she didn't waste any spiritual power or medicinal pills. With Fu Yaozi's experience and vision, he did the right thing at the right time, and achieved the best result. Master, since I've reached the peak stage of the core formation realm, should we go to the Sea of Returning Ruins next? There's no hurry, Fu Yaozi said. Before going to the Sea of Returning Ruins, you must prepare something that can restrain devil aura. Huh. Mo Tiange was stunned and puzzled. Why? Fu Yaozi said. For some reason, there's a very powerful devil aura in that wonderful place. If you don't have something that can restrain devil aura, you'll inevitably be in a mess. I see. Mo Tiange thought for a moment, then took out the lotus scarlet umbrella from her Qingkuan bag. Master, what do you think of this? The divine sense from the Fuxing sword flew out and circled around the lotus scarlet umbrella. Fu Yaozi said, this thing has a miraculous effect in isolating devil aura. However, in my opinion, the best magic weapon you have to restrain devil aura is your natal magic weapon. Natal magic weapon, heaven and earth fan? Mo Tiange was puzzled. Master, disciple's heaven and earth fan isn't special. That's because you're not knowledgeable enough, Fu Yaozi said gently. I can see that the bones of your fan are obviously made of the bones of divine beasts. Divine beasts are born with the ability to restrain devil aura, so it's best to use it to deal with devil cultivators. Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. She suddenly recalled the encounter she had in Descending Star City several decades ago. At that time, Mei Feng, the city lord of Descending Star City, was chasing after her, but she didn't know why she was seriously injured. At that time, she was indeed using the heaven and earth fan to defend herself. In that case, it was actually the dragon bone on the heaven and earth fan that played a role. Then she remembered where the dragon bones came from. This thing was something she obtained from the divine dragon sacrificial temple when she was still in the foundation building realm. In that sacrificial temple, there was also a strange stone tablet that allowed Ren Yufeng to cultivate his dead aura. Could it be that the dragon bone was actually used to restrain that stone tablet? Then, she associated City Lord Mei's devil aura with the so-called cultivation technique on the stone tablet. According to her conjecture, City Lord Mei should have obtained a stone tablet from the Black Tortoise sacrificial temple that also contained devil aura. She had a faint conjecture in her heart. However, she couldn't confirm this conjecture at the moment. But she might be able to verify it if there was an opportunity in the future. I do have a few tricks up my sleeves when it comes to dealing with demonic cultivators. With these 2 magic treasures of yours, it should be enough. However, you still need to prepare some things. Yes, Master. Mo Tiange wasn't surprised by Fu Yaozi's words. He fought alone against 10 devil monarchs without falling into a disadvantageous position, and even forced them to retreat. This master of hers obviously had some kind of unique secret technique to deal with devil cultivators. In addition, the Fuxing sword he possessed was obviously corroded by the devil aura, but he didn't care about it at all. Obviously, the devil aura didn't affect him at all. Following Fu Yaozi's instructions, Mo Tiange left the Western continent several days later. Fu Yaozi's unique secret technique sounded simple. It was nothing more than a set of spells and some things to restrain devils. However, it was precisely because it was simple that Mo Tiange felt it was more powerful than any other method. After all, in a fight of magical powers above the core formation realm, the situation could change in an instant. If it was too complicated, she might as well not use it. However, in this case, she had to prepare even more things. Cloud Wing City was one of the cultivation cities in Eastern Tang Country. In terms of scale, it wasn't the largest, and in terms of population, it also wasn't the one with the highest population. However, it was undoubtedly the most prosperous one. The reason for this was none other than the fact that it was a city adjacent to the capital of Eastern Tang Country. It wasn't under the jurisdiction of any cultivation group, and it also had a strong transportation advantage like the capital. Thus, it became the cultivation city with the most transactions. After leaving the Western continent, Mo Tiange, still in the appearance of a young scholar, arrived at Cloud Wing City. Although no one knew Yi Xiaotian was Qin Wei these past few years, with her cautious personality, she still chose Cloud Wing City, a city that didn't belong to any force, to buy what she needed. She had come to this Cloud Wing City several years ago when she was traveling around various countries, so she didn't need a guide, nor did she need to ask a broker. She was already familiar with the way and found the biggest shop in the city. Although this city wasn't under the jurisdiction of any cultivation group, Jingshu School, one of the 5 great cultivation groups in Eastern Tang Country, happened to be near the capital. Because of this, Jingshu School had a lot of disciples in Cloud Wing City, and its shops were also very big. For example, The shop Emotinga chose was opened by Jingshu School. Welcome, senior. As soon as she stepped into the shop, a woman greeted her enthusiastically. Because of the founder of Jingshu School, they accepted a lot of female disciples. Therefore, most of the customers in this shop were women. Women were naturally attentive, so they were even more attentive when greeting customers. Because of this, Jingshu School's shop had always been very popular. It was almost always packed with people. However, Emotienga was a core formation cultivator, so she didn't need to squeeze with these people. She was directly invited to a private room upstairs and was received by a cultivator with a higher level. When she saw the female foundation building cultivator, Emotienga didn't say anything unnecessary. She directly took out a jade slip from her robe and threw it on the table. I wonder if your shop has these materials? The female cultivator took the jade slip and used her divine sense to study it. She then smiled and said, "Senior, we have most of these materials in our shop, so we can directly prepare them for you. As for a small portion that's relatively rare, if you trust us, Junior can also prepare them for you in 1 or 2 days." Emotinga nodded. Among these materials, some were relatively rare. If it was an ordinary shop, they most likely wouldn't have them. The fact that Jingshu School needed 1 or 2 days to prepare them was already considered very good. She didn't feel like asking shop by shop. Since the other party said they could directly prepare them for her, it saved her a lot of effort. That being the case, you can prepare them for me. Once she finished speaking, she took out a chinkuan bag from her robe and threw it on the table. Does your shop accept these things? The things inside the bag were all kinds of materials she'd accumulated over the years. Some were collected by killing other cultivators, some were exchanged with others, and some were accidentally obtained by herself. Ever since she came to Yunzhong, the spirit stones she had on her had been used up. Coupled with the needs for her cultivation, she'd almost used up all her spirit stones. She might as well take these things out and exchange them for a large amount of spirit stones. Sure enough, when the female cultivator opened the chinkuan bag, she was shocked to see the mountainous pile of things inside. There were tool refining materials, spiritual plants, medicinal pills, magic tools, magic weapons, as well as many demonic beast corpses and beast cores. Some weren't worth much, but some were very valuable. Based on her years of experience in managing the shop, not only would these things offset the materials the senior wanted to buy, but there would also be a lot of surplus. She could also see that these miscellaneous things must have been collected by many cultivators. It seemed the senior looked kind, but his methods were extraordinary. Perhaps many cultivators had died in his hands. Thinking up to this point, the female cultivator didn't dare to be careless. She said respectfully, "Senior, the value of these things is astonishing. Junior can't handle them all by myself. Please give me some time." Emotienga also knew that if she took out so many things, it would take the other party a lot of time just to calculate the value. So she didn't express any displeasure. She just nodded and said, "Do what you need to do." "Yes, please wait a moment, senior." This female cultivator was quite efficient. A moment later, she returned with the other 2 foundation building cultivators. In front of Emotienga, they counted the things in the chinkuan bag one by one, estimated their value, and made a list. The results shocked Emotienga. Originally, she didn't care much about these things. Most of them were obtained from other cultivators, and she had already put away some of the more precious items. Even so, the final result was still hundreds of thousands of spirit stones. Several 100,000 spirit stones. This was the amount of money she'd been paying Xianqing School for several decades. She just realized she'd used up all her spirit stones, so she had no choice but to exchange these things for spirit stones. She didn't expect them to be worth so much money. However, she forgot that ever since she built her foundation, she never lacked spirit stones. Everything she obtained was directly thrown into the chinkuan bag. After more than 100 years of accumulation, many a little makes an ocean, and it became a terrifying number. Senior. After spending most of the day calculating the items, the female cultivator, who called herself Lu Xiaoqing, handed the list to her. "This is the specific value. Please take a look, senior." Mo Tiange took the animal skin paper and glanced at it several times. These people were quite capable. Not only did they calculate the value, but they also divided the items into categories, making it clear at a glance. Among the items, there were valuable demonic beast corpses, beast cores, magic weapons, and so on. Their prices were slightly lower than the market price, but this was how shops received things, so the price given by Jingshu Pavilion could be considered fair. She handed the animal skin paper back and said, "That's it." Seeing that she didn't have any objections, these foundation-building cultivators heaved sighs of relief. They glanced at each other, but Lu Xiaoqing said, "Senior, to be honest, the value of these things is too high. With Junior's authority, we can't transfer so many spirit stones in a short time. It just so happens that Senior wants to buy a lot of materials, so Juniors want to offset the cost and make up for the difference. However, because Senior needs time to purchase the things you need, we can't complete the transaction." The reason why Mo Tiange sold these things was to buy the materials on the jade slip. Besides, with her current cultivation level, she wasn't afraid they'd renege on their debt, so she said, "You just need to do it. I'll be staying at Yushi Restaurant in the next few days. When you're done, send the things to Yushi Restaurant." "Yes. Rest assured, Senior. If it's quick, it'll take 1 day. If it's slow, it'll take 2 days. Juniors will definitely do it for Senior." Mo Tiange nodded. Without saying anything more, she stood up and left Jingshu Pavilion. After she left, the 3 foundation-building cultivators of Jingshu Pavilion didn't move. "Senior Marshal Sister Lu," one of the cultivators called out to Lu Xiaoqing with a hesitant expression. "This senior sold so many things. Should we report this to the steward's hall?" Lu Xiaoqing stared at the place where Mo Tiange disappeared. She was silent for a long time before she finally said, "No need to make a fuss. This senior has an extraordinary bearing, so he's probably a disciple of a big cultivation group. If there's something wrong with his background, he wouldn't sell them to us so casually. Besides, judging from the things he took out, not only is his cultivation level profound, but his methods are also extraordinary. We have to do our best." Yes, Lu Xiaoqing had a lot of prestige. After she said that, the other 2 foundation-building cultivators didn't have the slightest objection. Right after the 3 of them said that, another high-level cultivator appeared at the top of the stairs. His formidable spiritual aura pressure made the 3 of them shift their gazes in an instant. "Marshal Uncle Lu," the aura-refining disciple who led the guests called out timidly. This senior, although Lu Xiaoqing's cultivation level wasn't high, she'd been taking care of the sex stores for a long time, so her experience was extraordinary. With a single glance, she could tell that the cultivator who just appeared was a nascent soul cultivator. She promptly went to greet him. "Senior, welcome to Jingshu Pavilion." Chapter 442. The appearance of a nascent soul cultivator made the second floor of Jingshu Pavilion quiet down all of a sudden. Even the customers who were previously talking in low voices stopped talking at the same time. Intentionally or unintentionally, their gazes landed on the new nascent soul cultivator. Although there were many nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong, they weren't people they could casually meet. 8 or 9 out of 10 cultivators below the core formation realm had never seen a nascent soul cultivator in their entire lives. The nascent soul senior in front of them looked to be about 30 years old. He had a handsome face and a heroic spirit. However, although he looked young, his pitch-black hair was mixed with a few strands of white hair, adding a bit of vicissitudes to his appearance. But it was also because of this that his originally outstanding demeanor carried a sense of tiredness and loneliness, which attracted the gazes of others even more. "Senior, it's our honor to have you here at Jingshu Pavilion. Junior is Jingshu Pavilion's shopkeeper Lu Xiaoqing. What can I do for Senior?" Looking at this senior, Lu Xiaoqing's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. She had seen countless people, and had seen many more handsome men in the cultivation world, but she had never seen such a figure. However, she didn't forget that this was a nascent soul senior. She immediately restrained her thoughts, and respectfully invited him to a private room. The screen around the private room isolated them from other people's gazes. The other two foundation-building cultivators had already taken away the goods they just traded. Lu Xiaoqing stood respectfully to the side, waiting for instructions. Cough cough. The nascent soul cultivator covered his mouth and coughed twice before speaking. Do you have any medicinal pills for healing injuries in your shop? Lu Xiaoqing was stunned, but she suddenly understood. This senior looked young, but he had white hair. As it turned out, he was injured. Although she had such guesses in her heart, she still answered respectfully. Senior, our shop indeed has several medicinal pills for healing injuries. However, Senior's cultivation level is at the nascent soul realm. Even if we have some inherited spiritual pills, they might be of no use to Senior. The nascent soul cultivator nodded. He didn't seem surprised. He threw a jade slip and said, Since that's the case, take a look and see if we have these materials. Yes. Lu Xiaoqing picked up the jade slip and carefully read it. She then smiled and said, What a coincidence. If Senior had come earlier, we really wouldn't have some things. Coincidentally, a cultivator just sold us a lot of materials, among which were the spiritual plants and monster cores that Senior needed. Really? This coincidence caused the nascent soul cultivator's eyebrows to arch up. However, that was all. He calmly asked, Is the age enough? Our shop's appraiser has seen it. It should meet Senior's requirements. Lu Xiaoqing paused and asked, Junior will go get it now and show it to Senior. The nascent soul cultivator nodded. He silently sipped his tea and coughed from time to time, not sparing her a single glance. Lu Xiaoqing did not dare to be negligent. She immediately returned to the counter and gave a few instructions to the building foundation stage cultivator, who was sorting the items. Soon, she came back with a few spiritual herbs and demon cores. Senior, please take a look. Opening the jade box, there were 5th rank and 6th rank monster cores. Apart from the relatively rare species, they weren't considered rare. There were also a few stalks of spirit grass that made his eyes light up. In the past few days, he had traveled to almost all the big cities in the northern part of Eastern Tang, but he still hadn't found these spiritual herbs. Some people hadn't even heard of them, while some people knew about them, but they said these spiritual herbs were rarely produced in the clouds. He had almost given up hope and looked for another spiritual herb. However, he had never expected that he would find it in Cloudwing City. Lu Xiaoqing observed his expression. At this moment, she was certain that if there were no accidents, this transaction could be considered a success. She couldn't help but smile. Today's luck was really good. Although she spent hundreds of thousands of spirit stones, the items she bought were extremely valuable, and she also made 2 big deals. The things that Senior Yi and this senior wanted were all worth tens of thousands of spirit stones. Yes, I'll take all of these. While she was meditating, the nascent soul cultivator put down the spiritual herbs in his hand and spoke. Lu Xiaoqing smiled and bowed, saying, Then, Junior will put them away for Senior? The nascent soul cultivator nodded and said, How much are they worth? Lu Xiaoqing quickly put away the spiritual herbs and demon cores in front of her, pasted talismans to prevent the loss of spiritual aura, counted them, and reported the total price. These things, after rounding them up, come to a total of 52,000 spirit stones. If Senior doesn't mind, please wait a moment. Junior will calculate the detailed list. The nascent soul cultivator said, There's no hurry. Since you're the shopkeeper here, you should be well informed. Can I ask you a few questions? Since a nascent soul cultivator asked, how could Lu Xiaoqing refuse? She immediately said, If Senior has something to ask, Junior will tell you everything I know. The cultivator coughed twice, then asked, Have you heard of the name Yi Xiaodian? Lu Xiaoqing thought for a moment. Senior, the nascent soul cultivator continued. She's a female core formation cultivator. She should be in the late stage already. He paused for a moment, then added, Maybe she's already formed her nascent soul. She's young, in her 20s, very beautiful. Speaking up to this point, the cultivator stopped talking with a slightly hesitant expression on his face. These descriptions really couldn't be considered characteristics. Among female core formation cultivators, many were in their 20s, young and beautiful. However, If he were to talk about their real characteristics, he felt that it wasn't enough. Sure enough, after Lu Xiaoqing heard this, she was very hesitant. Senior, what you said is really hard to distinguish. Moreover, should be in the late stage already, and maybe she's already formed her nascent soul were too vague. Could it be that this senior also didn't know the cultivation level of the person he was looking for? However, the name Yi Xiaotian did sound a little familiar. She thought carefully for a moment, and a thought flashed through her mind. She then furrowed her brows in suspicion. After pondering for a moment, she finally said, Senior, Junior has never seen the female core formation cultivator you're talking about. However, Junior has heard of the name Yi Xiaotian. Oh. The nascent soul cultivator raised his brows and looked at her. Go ahead. More than 10 years ago, Junior heard that there was a core formation martial uncle in the sect, who was on good terms with a core formation senior named Yi Xiaotian. That senior was very young, but his cultivation level was already in the late stage of the core formation realm. However, that senior was a male cultivator, not a female cultivator. After hearing this, the nascent soul cultivator remained silent. Lu Xiaoqing waited for a while, but he didn't say anything. She couldn't help but call out, Senior? Upon hearing her voice, the nascent soul cultivator finally asked, Then do you know where he went later? Lu Xiaoqing shook her head and said, Junior doesn't know. I remember this matter only because Junior has been taking care of the shop for the sect for many years, so I've always paid attention to people and matters. If Senior wants to inquire about this Senior Ye's whereabouts, Junior can report to the sect on Senior's behalf. Upon hearing this, the cultivator nodded and said, You can settle the bill for me first. Yes. Lu Xiaoqing respectfully withdrew from the room. There was no one else in the private room. The nascent soul cultivator pondered for a while, then took out an animal skin parchment from his bosom. There was a drawing of a young woman on the polished animal skin parchment. He was familiar with her appearance, but he'd never heard of her name. Qingwei, Tiange, I know it's you. But the people in Yunzhong said Qingwei has been missing for more than 10 years. Where am I supposed to find you? After leaving Jingshu School's shop, she didn't immediately go to Yushi Building to rest. Instead, she found another tool refining shop and entered it. Half a day later, she came out of the tool refining shop and spent a large amount of spirit stones. During her years in she found a stock of black iron core wood. If it was made into a boat, it was said to be able to withstand the gales and huge waves on the sea. Since she was going to returning ruins sea this time, she decided to refine this black iron core wood into a magic weapon first to increase her chances of success. However, her own tool refining technique really wasn't good enough, so she thought it would be better to ask someone else to refine it for her. Yunzhong was so big, so it wasn't difficult to find a tool refining master who could refine magic weapons. After all, black iron core wood was rare, so she couldn't afford to waste it. Fortunately, when she passed by Uni City in the past, she heard that there were several tool refining shops with good craftsmanship in the city. She found one with the best reputation and entrusted this matter to him. After that, she took care of some miscellaneous matters before returning to Yushi Building and asking for a quiet courtyard to stay. She meditated and adjusted her breath while waiting for news. She hadn't been to Eastern Tang Country for nearly 10 years. When she was talking to the shopkeeper of Yushi Building just now, she heard an interesting piece of news. The three major righteous sects had jointly announced to the world that the real Fuxing sword had appeared, and they invited the owner of the Heavenly Devil Pagoda to gather in returning ruins sea to discuss this important matter. As soon as she heard this news, Emotinga couldn't help but laugh. If it was before, she might have really suspected that the Fuxing sword in her hand was fake. However, she had triggered the restriction in the Fuxing sword and was personally taught by Fu Yaozi, so it was needless to say whether the Fuxing sword was real or fake. Presumably, the three major righteous sects deliberately released this news to attract Qingwei to show up. This plan wasn't brilliant, but it was profitable. If Qingwei was really still in Yunzhong, she would most likely not be able to resist verifying it. After Fu Yaozi heard this, he said contemptuously, "A bunch of idiots. Even if the Fuxing sword fell into their hands, so what? Can they still find someone who can make the Fuxing sword recognize a master? This was the first time Emotienga heard Fu Yaozi talk about others in such a tone. This master of hers had a good temper, and had always been a modest gentleman. However, when it came to his Fuxing sword, he couldn't help it. Emotienga already knew that the 5 sacred objects needed to recognize a master before they could be used. The 3 major cultivation groups were in a hurry to find the Fuxing sword. Perhaps they already found a master for the 3 sacred objects in their hands? However, this matter couldn't be blamed on the cultivators of the 3 major cultivation groups. They didn't know that the Fuxing sword had already recognized a master. Most likely, they just wanted to get the Fuxing sword and quickly find a suitable master. The people of Jingshu Pavilion acted very quickly. The next day, they delivered the items and spirit stones. After Emotienga checked them, the money and goods were settled. Several days later, after wasting more than half of the black iron core wood in the tool refining shop, they finally made a magic weapon. This magic weapon was named the 10,000 Miles Solitary Boat by the tool refining master. Although this name was very vulgar, Emotienga was too lazy to object. It didn't matter what it was called. What was important was that this magic weapon could really withstand the strong gales and huge waves in the sea. After getting the 10,000 Miles Solitary Boat and paying the accommodation fee, Emotienga didn't stay any longer and set off for returning Ruins Sea. Several days later, at the end of the month, Lu Shaoqing delivered a batch of rare treasures to Jingshu School according to the rules. Coincidentally, she met the nascent soul senior, who went to Jingshu School to inquire about Yi Xiaotian, and was left behind by the school's nascent soul grandmaster. When this nascent soul senior saw a bottle of medicinal pills, his gaze was immediately attracted. Jingshu School's head grand supreme elder, progenitor Miaoying, noticed his expression and asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Qin, is there something you're interested in here?" The nascent soul cultivator surnamed Qin was still staring at the bottle of medicinal pills. He asked, "Fellow Taoist Miaoying, you don't mind if I take a look, right?" "Of course. It's not like it's anything good. If fellow Taoist Qin takes a fancy to it, you can just take it," progenitor Miaoying said with a smile. Although these things were precious, they were nothing to a nascent soul cultivator. If she could use this chance to befriend a powerful middle-stage nascent soul cultivator, it would definitely be worth it. After getting permission, the cultivator surnamed Qin raised his hand, and the jade bottle automatically flew into his hand. He carefully examined the jade bottle. It seemed like this was the real treasure. Finally, he opened the bottle and sniffed the medicinal pills inside. "Immortal wind dew," he muttered to himself. In the next moment, he raised his head and looked at Lu Shaoqing with a sharp gaze. "Junior, where did you get this medicinal pill?" Lu Shaoqing was startled by his gaze and hastily answered, "A cultivator sold it to Jingshu School." "Oh, that cultivator seems to have quite the affinity with Senior." Most of the spiritual herbs and monster cores that Senior wanted were sold to the store by that cultivator. When he heard this, his expression changed and he asked again, "What's his name? What's his cultivation level? What does he look like? When did he sell it to the store? Where did he go?" After hearing this series of questions, Lu Shaoqing didn't dare to neglect and answered one by one. Junior only knows that his surname is Yi. He's a core formation realm male cultivator with the appearance of a young scholar. On the day that Senior came to the store, this Senior Yi came to sell a large amount of materials, just right after Senior came. As for where he went, Junior doesn't know. A young scholar with the surname Yi was exactly the same as the Yi Xiaotian that others said. He took a deep breath, stood up and cupped his hands towards progenitor Miaoying. "Fellow Taoist Miaoying, I'm afraid the person I'm looking for has already appeared. Thank you for your hospitality these past few days. I'll take my leave first." Chapter 443. A month later, on the coast of the Sea of Returning Ruins in the south of Yunzhong, a young scholar stood in the air, looking down at the island under his feet. The island wasn't big, only dozens of miles in circumference. Looking down from above, It looked like a green leaf, so it was called One Leaf Island. In terms of scale, One Leaf Island was pitifully small. Any town or city in eastern Tang had a bigger market than it. But in terms of scale, there was no market in Yunzhong that had a higher standard than One Leaf Island. On this island, core formation cultivators could be seen everywhere, and nascent soul cultivators often showed up. Even the merchants who took care of the shops were cultivators above the foundation building realm. The reason why there were so many high-grade cultivators gathered on this small island, with very ordinary spiritual qi, was due to its perfect geographical location. Cultivators in Yunzhong usually went to two places to hunt demonic beasts. One was the North Sea in the north, and the other was the Sea of Returning Ruins in the south. In the North Sea, there happened to be a large island called North Pole Island. There were countless demonic beasts around it, ranging from low to high level. So a large number of aura refining and core formation cultivators gathered on North Pole Island to hunt beasts for a living, forming a huge beast core market. But the Sea of Returning Ruins was different. Its beast market wasn't big, and compared to North Pole Island, it was pitifully small. However, it was more famous among high-level cultivators than North Pole Island. This was because the sea beasts in the Sea of Returning Ruins were mostly in the 5th rank and above, and the corpses and beast cores, produced by these demonic beasts, were exactly what cultivators above the core formation realm needed. One Leaf Island happened to be located at an estuary of the Sea of Returning Ruins, so its location was excellent. Over time, cultivators who came to the Sea of Returning Ruins to hunt beasts formed a small but high-end beast market there. Mo Tinga stood in the air for a while, then asked, "Master, do you want to stay here? I'm afraid those late nascent soul cultivators are all gathered here, right?" The Fuxing sword let out a soft cry, and Fu Yaozi's voice came. "Go. You've made the Fuxing sword recognize you as its master. With me here, those cultivators can't do anything to you no matter how high their cultivation levels are." Mo Tinga hesitated for a moment, then believed him. After living together for several years, she and Fu Yaozi had developed a true master-disciple relationship. She believed that her master wouldn't be wrong. He landed at the edge of the One Leaf Island and registered himself at the entrance of the town under the name Yi Xiaotian. This One Leaf Island was indeed worthy of its reputation of having the highest standards. As soon as they entered the town, they saw many core formation cultivators walking back and forth on the streets. Many of them were foundation building cultivators who were hawking their wares and taking care of the shops. In other cultivator towns, there weren't many aura refining cultivators and mortals. Most of them were just doing odd jobs in the shops. Whether it was in the Celestial Pole or Yunzhong, she had never seen so many high-level cultivators gathered in one place. Moreover, among these high-level cultivators, there were often one or two nascent soul cultivators coming and going. One Leaf Island is still the same as before. Fu Yaozi sighed. Although he was shapeless and only had a wisp of divine sense left, his secret technique was astonishing. He could still sense everything around him. Mo Tinga smiled and said, "Master seems to be very familiar with One Leaf Island." Fu Yaozi said, "I'm not like you. Without the support of a sect, from the moment I stepped onto the path of immortality to the moment I formed my nascent soul, I've always been a rogue cultivator. The life of an individual cultivator isn't easy. When I was in the aura refining and foundation building realm, I was very down and out. After I formed my gold core, I often came to One Leaf Island to hunt demonic beasts, which made my life a lot better." Upon hearing this, Mo Tinga couldn't help but nod to show she understood. She had experienced the hardships she and second uncle went through in the past, so she was very touched by what Fu Yaozi said about being down and out. However, thinking about it this way, this master of hers was really amazing. With an incomplete art of the origin and no heaven-defying immortal fate, he grew from a down and out low-level cultivator to the #1 cultivator in Yunzhong. She didn't know how many hardships he had to go through to achieve this. "Master, should we go there and rest for a while before going out to sea?" "No," Fu Yaozi said. "You can't go out to sea alone." Mo Tinga was stunned. "What do you mean, master?" Fu Yaozi chuckled. That place can only be opened if 5 keys are combined into one. What's the use of going there alone? We'll naturally wait for the others to go together. But Emotienga was full of questions. Even if her master was giving her ideas behind the scenes, she was only a core formation cultivator in the end. How could she compete with those late-stage nascent soul cultivators? Once the secret place was opened, not to mention benefits, she'd probably be eaten until not even her bones were left. Don't worry, Fu Yaozi said faintly. Master naturally won't let you suffer any losses. Master, I can't not worry, Emotinga admitted calmly. Although I have the Fuxing sword in my hand and Master as my backing, I'm only one person in the end. They also have holy objects in their hands. Not only are they powerful, but the forces behind them are also astonishing. Fu Yaozi smiled. It's useless even if they have holy objects. Huh? Why? Emotienga was puzzled. Fu Yaozi said, to tell you the truth, among the so-called 5 saints, the other 4 have disciples to pass on their inheritance to, but Master doesn't. Therefore, when Master sealed my divine sense, I did something. As for the other 4, I only sealed their divine sense and part of their secret technique. If a disciple obtained the key and passed on the secret technique to them, their divine sense would dissipate. Only Master's divine sense could exist for a long time. Emotienga once witnessed Wanderer Ziwei's method and was left an imprint in her sea of knowledge. Wanderer Ziwei was so talented that he sealed his divine sense for thousands of years. Even after being triggered, his divine sense wouldn't dissipate and could even continue to exist. Therefore, she never doubted Fu Yaozi's method of sealing divine sense. After all, he was the legendary #1 person in Yunzhong. As for the other members of the 5 saints, she also thought the same. They were called the 5 saints, so even if the others were a bit weaker than her master, they shouldn't be too much weaker. Now that she heard Fu Yaozi's words, she realized her master's skill was a notch higher. With this thought in mind, Emotienga suddenly realized something inside. Master, you're not as honest as you look. What are you talking about? Fu Yaozi reprimanded. Although I consider myself an upright and above-board person, I'm not a person without schemes. Yes, from an individual cultivator without any foundation to the #1 cultivator in Yunzhong, no one could surpass him for more than 100,000 years. How could this master of hers be completely upright and pure? With this thought, she felt a lot more at ease. Now that she was relieved, she also became interested in the market square of this one-leaf island. Just as she was about to take a stroll, she suddenly felt a powerful divine sense stopping on her. She immediately looked up and saw a cultivator in his 50s, sitting by the window on the 2nd floor of a restaurant. He was dressed like a wealthy man from the secular world, and was staring at her with a sharp gaze. This person's spiritual aura pressure was strong, but he was a nascent soul cultivator. For a moment, Emotinga couldn't figure out what this cultivator meant, but she had Fu Yaozi by her side, so she didn't show any fear. Instead, she smiled at him and cupped her hands to show her respect to this senior. The cultivator was stunned for a moment, as if he didn't expect she would act like this. Soon after, both his divine sense and his gaze moved away from her. Emotinga heaved a sigh of relief and continued to stroll around the market. It didn't matter whether this person noticed her illusion or something else. In any case, she'd already arrived at the Sea of Returning Ruins. It was only a matter of time before she came into contact with those top nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong. Brother Nanyor? On the 2nd floor of the restaurant, a young Taoist sitting across from the cultivator looked at him with a smile and a hint of confusion in his eyes. The male cultivator called Brother Nan stroked his grizzled beard and said, "It's nothing. I just happened to discover that this junior is a bit unusual." Oh, the young Taoist turned his head to look outside the window. People were coming and going, but that core formation cultivator was already gone. What's unusual about him? This person has a powerful divine sense fluctuation. Moreover, I only glanced at him for a moment, but he immediately noticed me. Is that so? The young Taoist swept his gaze across the street and said with a meaningful smile, "Recently, One Leaf Island has been really lively. Not only did all those old monsters come into being, but the juniors in the core formation realm are also so outstanding. The cultivator surnamed Nan also smiled. He leisurely held his wine cup and took a sip. Brother Rui, based on our many years of friendship, how about you give me a hint? What's your 5 Elements Valley planning to do this time? A hint. The young Taoist rubbed his nose and looked at the person in front of him with a faint smile. What's there to be a hint? Our 5 Elements Valley's strength is inferior. We're just here to watch the fun and take advantage of the situation. On the other hand, Brother Nan, your Dansha sect brought a lot of people this time. Heh. The cultivator surnamed Nan laughed self-deprecatingly. Taoist Brother Rui, I might as well tell you the truth. Everyone knows the situation of our dawning pill sect. We really want to seize this opportunity. However, wanting is one thing, but I'm powerless. The cultivator surnamed Nan's words made the young Taoist feel sad. He sighed and said, Isn't that right? Among the 5 great Tao cultivation groups, our 2 groups are the weakest, but at this time, the 5 holy relics unexpectedly appeared, and our strength is inferior. I really don't know if we're lucky or not. Yuan Mu and the others invited us here. On the surface, they said we're all fellow Taoists and we don't dare to hog it for ourselves. But in reality, the cultivator surnamed Nan sneered. They have the holy relics in their hands, and their strength far surpasses us, middle-stage nascent soul cultivators. We're just here to go through the motions. The young Taoist smiled while holding his cup. Brother Nan, could it be that you still can't get over it? Who told you and I to be weaker than others, and our luck to be worse? If we advanced to the late stage of the nascent soul realm, even if we didn't obtain the holy relics, we could still compete with Yuan Mu and the others. Unfortunately, after so many years, you and I are still stuck at this bottleneck and can't advance. Naturally, we can only accept our fate. How could the cultivator surnamed Nan not understand this reasoning? In the end, he just sighed and said nothing. At this time, Mo Tienga was strolling in a tea house, listening to other people's gossip with great interest. The matter of the 5 saints was now a hot topic in Yunzhong. A large number of high-level cultivators gathered on One Leaf Island, and it happened to be the location of the incident, so it was naturally even more popular. During the past month, Mo Tienga had been traveling cautiously, but she didn't know this matter was actually this popular. As it turned out, in addition to the owner of the Heavenly Devil Tower, the 3 great sects also invited nascent soul cultivators from various big forces. Nominally, the things left behind by the 5 saints were the Commonwealth of Yunzhong, so the 3 great sects didn't dare to hog it for themselves. Therefore, after the mysterious space was opened, all nascent soul cultivators could enter and explore it. But was that really the case? Mo Tienga didn't need to think to know the real reason. Now the matter of the 5 saints had spread throughout Yunzhong, and it was no longer a secret only a few high-level cultivators knew. If the 3 great sects hoarded it for themselves, no matter how powerful they were, they wouldn't be able to withstand the joint attack of others. That being the case, they might as well share some of the benefits with others. In any case, they had the most important holy relics in their hands, and were the strongest, so they would still get the biggest benefits in the end. But even though the nascent soul cultivators understood this reason, they still rushed to One Leaf Island like a flock of ducks. After all, when it came to fated chances, luck played a very important role. Who knew if they'd obtained a great fated chance? Deification. This was a temptation that nascent soul cultivators, at the top of the cultivation world, couldn't resist. Driven by benefits, they advanced wave after wave. Chapter 444. In just a few days, there were more and more nascent soul cultivators on One Leaf Island. Nascent soul cultivators who used to only see 1 or 2 nascent soul cultivators swaggered through the market square now, and many of them were in the middle stage or higher. This gave Mo Tienga more pleasure. She asked for a room facing the street in an inn. When she had nothing to do, she leaned against the window and counted the nascent soul cultivators passing by. She discussed with Fu Yaozi with great interest their cultivation levels, sex, and approximate cultivation techniques. This rare childishness unexpectedly aroused Fu Yaozi's interest, and he enthusiastically discussed with her every day. In the beginning, Mo Tiange thought her master had been trapped inside the Fuxing sword for too long, so she was very interested in everything in the world. Later on, she slowly realized her master was deliberately cultivating her judgment. She was secretly moved when she realized this. Although she called Fu Yaozi master, deep in her heart, the closest master to her was Lord Taoist Jinghe. A few years couldn't compare to a few decades. However, Fu Yaozi's unreserved and careful teaching slowly made her feel reluctant. Every time she thought her master's divine sense might dissipate soon and leave her forever, she felt sad. Of course, this sadness was quickly suppressed. She knew from the beginning that that day would come, so she was mentally prepared. At the same time, she began to practice the technique to restrain devil cultivators. This law formula was obtained by Fu Yaozi from an ancient cultivator's cave dwelling. It was extremely suitable for those who practiced the primordial chaos cultivation method to cultivate. With Fu Yaozi's personal guidance, she was able to avoid any detours and cultivate at a rapid pace. Soon she saw results. As for the things she bought in Cloud Wing City, she used them one by one, either to refine magic weapons, to concoct medicinal pills, or to make formations. During this process, Fu Yaozi was dismissive of her tool refining level, expressing his disdain. Unfortunately, Mo Tiange didn't feel embarrassed at all. She wasn't a genius who was good at everything like Mo Yaoqing, so it was normal for her to have high and low talents in miscellaneous studies. Although she wasn't good at tool refining, her attainments in pill concocting and formations weren't something ordinary people could achieve. What Mo Tiange found interesting was that as the number of high-level cultivators on One Leaf Island increased, the number of spies in the market square also increased. Most of these spies were paying attention to core formation cultivators who entered the island for the first time. Although they didn't offend them, they were always monitoring them. With Fu Yao by her side, Mo Tiange had a well-thought-out plan. She just pretended she didn't see these informants and continued living her leisurely life. While she was passing her days leisurely, the most important figures of One Leaf Island finally arrived. In the center of One Leaf Island, there was a short peak. It was the place with the densest spirit chi on the island. Although this bit of spirit chi was not worth mentioning compared to the spirit chi of the major sects, it was still divided up by the major factions and built into branches. This short peak was located in the center of the market. Although there were guards on normal days, there were still people coming and going. Only these few days, there were layers of restrictions, and no one was allowed to enter. However, the cultivators of One Leaf Island and the disciples of the major sects did not dare to object, because they knew that the top nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong were gathered in the branch hall. Welcome grandmasters, martial uncles, to One Leaf Island. Several cultivators slowly walked into the branch hall of Juyin sect amid the shouts of Juyin sect's disciples. No need to be so polite. Get up. Master Taoist Yuanmu, who was walking at the front, waved his hand casually. Thank you, martial uncles. The branch head, a core formation cultivator from Juyin sect, stood up. He was about to step forward and report to the nascent soul martial uncles, so that he could leave a good impression on them and fight for a better future for himself. Senior martial brother, the martial uncles are tired, so you don't have to trouble yourselves. Just receive them the way you prepared them. If there are any problems, we'll naturally send someone to inform you. A young cultivator behind the nascent soul Grand Supreme Elders stopped him and said gently. This person was in the late stage of the core formation realm. He had a young face and a kind attitude, but there was an unquestionable decisiveness in his words. The branch had immediately recognized this person as Ling Yunhe, the sect leader of Juyin sect and the young master of Ling clan. He didn't ask any more questions and cupped his hands in response. Yes, sect leader. However, he looked a little disappointed. Ling Yunhe smiled and said, Senior martial brother, don't worry. If you do things well, the martial uncles will know what to do. Originally, the branch heads of each branch were only in the foundation building realm, but One Leaf Island's situation was special, so they used core formation cultivators. Being a branch head on One Leaf Island wasn't a difficult job, because there weren't any high-level cultivators pressuring them, and they could also fish for some benefits nearby. However, for core formation cultivators, the spirit veins on One Leaf Island were really lacking, and they couldn't focus on cultivation like they did in the sect. The gains didn't make up for the losses. Therefore, the branch leaders of the One Leaf Island were mostly old cultivators, in the core formation stage, who did not have any background. Now that they had such a grand event, they all wanted to show their faces in front of the Grand Elders in the nascent soul stage, and win their favor, so that they could be transferred back to the headquarters, and get some benefits. That was what this branch head was thinking, but unfortunately, he was interrupted by Ling Yunha. He was still feeling unhappy, but when he heard what Ling Yunha said and thought about how Ling Yunha, the sect head, comforted him like this, he felt much better. Thus he politely agreed and went to do his work. After all the unrelated people left, Master Taoist Yuanmu asked, "Brat, where's the person you arranged?" He didn't mention his name, but everyone knew this was what the nascent soul ancestors called Ling Yunha. Ling Yunha stepped forward and said, "Martial Uncle Yuanmu, please wait a moment. Martial Nephew has already informed him to come." Master Taoist Yuanmu nodded. Without saying anything else, he turned around and started chatting with his junior martial brothers. Before long, a foundation-building cultivator walked in respectfully. Disciple Ling Yishuan greets grandmasters. Master Taoist Yuanmu was a bit surprised to see this person. He didn't expect the person Ling Yunha sent to handle such an important matter would actually be a foundation-building cultivator. However, this Ling brat had always handled matters appropriately, so he didn't think too much about it. He raised his hand and said, "No need to be so polite." When Ling Yishuan stood up, Ling Yunha asked, "Xiaoshan, how's the matter going?" Ling Yishuan respectfully lowered his head. He then took out a jade slip from his robe and answered, "Reporting to grandmasters and martial uncles, this is the list of core formation cultivators who recently came to One Leaf Island. Disciple has already ordered people to investigate them." Ling Yunha took the jade slip, then presented it to the nascent soul elders. The nascent soul elders looked at it one by one before returning it to him. Ling Yunha looked through it, then asked, "Did you personally check on all these people?" Reporting to martial uncle sect head, Disciple has. The movements of all suspicious people are all within my grasp, so I can invite them at any time. Ling Yunha nodded with satisfaction, then turned around to report to the several elders in the hall. "Martial uncles, should we immediately invite them?" Master Taoist Yuanmu didn't answer. Instead, he glanced at his junior martial brothers. Ling Shiyu showed a faint smile, then said, "It's better to do it sooner rather than later." Master Taoist Yuanmu nodded, then glanced at Ling Yunha. Ling Yunha understood, and left the branch hall with Ling Yishuan. After she finished cultivating for the day, Emotienga went out for a stroll. She exchanged a large number of spirit stones from Cloud Wing City. And One Leaf Island was the most high-end market in Yunzhong, targeting core formation cultivators. How could she let go of this opportunity? When she was free, she went out for a walk and bought some precious things, which might come in handy in the future. Even if she didn't have any use for them, it would still be good to bring them back to the celestial pole. After she finished strolling in the market, she returned to the inn. Before she entered her room, the Fuxing sword on her back suddenly let out a cry. Fu Yao's voice rang in her head. "Someone's here." Emotienga smiled but didn't mind. In the market square, although everyone wouldn't casually use their divine sense, it wasn't to the point where she didn't notice there was someone in her room. It was just that this was within her expectations. So many geniuses came looking for us, but their movements are too slow. Fu Yao smiled bitterly and said, "Why don't you say your illusory transformation technique is too brilliant? Even nascent soul cultivators have to be in the middle stage before they can discover the abnormality. Even those with weak divine senses can't do it." In fact, although Nie Wushang's illusory transformation technique was brilliant, it wasn't to this extent. The reason why Emotienga could use it so effectively was because she had the spirit-concealing pendant. Facing her strange magic weapons, Fu Yao could only sigh in admiration. But the person's cultivation level doesn't seem high. Emotinga muttered as she pushed the door open. There were only 2 cultivators in the room, one sitting and one standing. One was in the core formation realm, and the other in the foundation building realm. They were actually acquaintances. Upon seeing her coming in, their gazes fell on her. Emotinga's eyes darted around, and immediately saw a jade disc-shaped magic weapon in one of their hands. As it turned out, they were able to see through her illusion, because they used their magic weapons. Fellow Taoist Qin, long time no see. Ling Yunhe stood up and politely clasped his hands to greet her. Emotinga showed a faint smile, and withdrew her illusory transformation technique, revealing her original appearance. It's indeed been a long time. Every time I wanted to look for fellow Taoist Ling, I was always hindered by mundane affairs. In the blink of an eye, it's been more than 50 years since we last met. Fellow Taoist Ling, how are you? Thank you for your concern, fellow Taoist Qin. I'm fine. Ling Yunhe's eyes flashed. He looked at her and couldn't help but say, after so many years, fellow Taoist Qin's cultivation level has advanced so quickly. I really admire you. Fellow Taoist Ling isn't bad either. You're hindered by mundane affairs and you're involved in disputes, but you're still able to make such progress. It's really rare. Ling Yunhe forced a smile but didn't say anything. The atmosphere was a bit strange. In the past, although the two of them didn't have a deep friendship, they talked naturally. Today, however, it was a superficial smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emotinga didn't blame Ling Yunhe. She understood the current situation very well. No matter what kind of friendship she had with Ling Yunhe in the past, he was still the school head of Juyin sect. From his standpoint, he had to consider the interests of the sect, even if she had previously saved his life. If the Ling Yunhe in the past was a peer she could befriend, then the Ling Yunhe today was someone she had to deal with. Xiaoshun, you also came to One Leaf Island. We haven't seen each other for many years. How are you now? Upon hearing her greeting, Ling Yishuan hastily cupped his hands and bowed. Thank you for your concern, senior. Xiaoshun is very good. Emotinga smiled but didn't say anything. The three of them were silent for a while. Ling Yunhe finally said, Fellow Taoist Qin, I have to thank you for helping me with the matter in Carefree Valley. Emotinga waved her hand and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Ling has already thanked me. There's no need to thank me again. Ling Yunhe was very serious. He took out a Qingkuan bag from his robe and handed it to her. I'm ashamed that I haven't fulfilled the reward I promised fellow Taoist Qin. I've kept these things with me for a long time. Today I'll return them to you. Emotinga sighed, took the Qingkuan bag and said, Fellow Taoist Ling, you don't need to feel guilty. Our positions are different, so there's nothing we can do about it. Ling Yunhe's expression softened a little. How could he not understand this principle? If it were someone else, he wouldn't feel anything at all, but, fellow Taoist Qin. He called out with a sigh. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end he swallowed his words. Then his expression changed. He put on a gentle and refined smile like a mask and said, As long as you hand over the Fuxing sword, I can guarantee no one will harass you in the future. Chapter 445. Emotinga looked very calm, and had a smile on her face. She didn't show any anger or helplessness from being threatened. This made Ling Yunhe feel he seemed to have missed something important, but he couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he thought. Fellow Taoist Ling, Emotinga said, I'm sorry but I can't do it. Ling Yunhe widened his eyes. Why? He thought she was a smart person, and wouldn't refuse to hand over something she shouldn't covet, no matter how precious it was. Since she could hand over the inescapable net, why couldn't she hand over the Fuxing sword? He took a deep breath and advised her cautiously, Fellow Taoist Qin, you have to think about it carefully. You're alone, so how can you fight against so many nascent soul cultivators? If you hand it over, I can talk to the ancestors and give you some benefits to compensate for your loss. Emotinga smiled then heaved a sigh. This time, although she was standing on the opposite side of Ling Yunhe, he still remembered their old friendship, which moved her a bit. Fellow Taoist Ling, I can't hand it over because the Fuxing sword has recognized me as its master. Ling Yunhe stared at her for a long time before he found his voice again. Recognized you as its master? You've made the Fuxing sword recognize you as its master? Yes. Mo Tiange looked at him calmly. So, take me to see those seniors. I think they'll be very happy to see me. After Juyin sect. The nascent soul cultivators of Yu Mountain Academy and Huayan Temple also arrived. In addition to Scholar Yu, there were also several nascent soul cultivators from Yu Mountain Academy and Baifu Mountain. Of course, most of these nascent soul cultivators were in the early stage. After all, it wasn't easy to advance after the nascent soul realm. In terms of numbers, the three groups had about the same number of nascent soul cultivators. But in terms of cultivation level, Juyin sect was undoubtedly the first. In addition to Master Taoist Yuan Mu, there was also an iron-faced Taoist, who was also in the late stage of the nascent soul realm. The others were all in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. Realizing this, Scholar Yu and revered Wu Ming couldn't help but curse silently. That old man Yuan Mu was truly cunning. He had 2 late-stage cultivators and several mid-stage cultivators. On One Leaf Island, they were still the strongest faction, but they had left all their early-stage cultivators in the sect. If anything happened, they could preserve Juyin sect's chances of survival and prevent their foundations from being shaken. Unfortunately, even if they knew they couldn't change anything, the Juyin sect dared to do this because they were powerful enough and had enough nascent soul cultivators. If it were them, if they left all the early-stage cultivators in the sect, they would not be able to bring many of them out. Mr. Yu, fellow Taoist of Vidya, you finally arrived. Reverend Yuanmu brought all the nascent soul cultivators out to welcome them. Scholar Yu and revered Wu Ming returned the greeting, and the 3 parties only entered after exchanging pleasantries. After all the cultivators had taken their seats and exchanged greetings, Scholar Yu went straight to the point. Fellow Taoist Yuan Mu, has the master of the Heavenly Devil Tower appeared? Yuan Mu Jinren said. There's news already, but we don't know his identity yet. That person sent a message, saying that he will come as promised. That's good. Scholar Yu tapped the folding fan in his hand, looking rather pleased with himself. Revered Wu Ming smiled and said, Mr. Yu's foresight is truly marvelous. The matter regarding the Heavenly Devil Tower was indeed correct, but I wonder how's the Fuxing sword? Master Yuan Mu Jinren was about to shake his head when he suddenly sensed something with his divine sense. He frowned and said, We'll know in a moment. Standing outside the reception room of the Juyin sect's branch hall, Ling Yunhe took a deep breath, then looked at Mo Tiange. Fellow Taoist Qin, please. Mo Tiange smiled. She didn't stand on ceremony, and took the lead to enter. Staring at her back, Ling Yunhe's expression was complicated, but he also followed her inside. As soon as she entered the reception room, countless gazes fell on her. Among them were 4 late-stage nascent soul cultivators, and about 10 middle-stage and early-stage cultivators. This was Mo Tiange's first time seeing so many nascent soul cultivators gathered in one place. These cultivators' powerful spiritual aura pressure enveloped her, either intentionally or unintentionally. If she was an ordinary core formation cultivator, under the gazes and spiritual aura pressure of so many nascent soul cultivators, she'd probably break out in a cold sweat and lose her will. However, she was already in the peak stage of the core formation realm, and her soul refining art was successful. So she wasn't afraid of the spiritual aura pressure of nascent soul cultivators. Of course, there were so many of them, and there were even quite a few late-stage nascent soul cultivators among them, so she still felt very uncomfortable. Celestial Pole Cultivator Mo Tiange greets seniors. She smiled and politely saluted everyone. Master Yuan Mu Jinren raised his eyebrows, and the others also looked surprised. Firstly, Mo Tiange's expression was so calm, as if she wasn't affected by the spiritual aura pressure at all. Secondly, the name she claimed wasn't Qin Wei, but Ling Yan's previous message said he'd brought Qin Wei back. Master Yuan Mu Jinren instantly regained his composure. No need to be so polite. Master Yuan Mu Jinren's gaze fell on Ling Yunhe, who also came in. He saw that Ling Yunhe also looked hesitant, but he still nodded at him. Master Yuan Muzhinren now knew what was going on. He smiled at Emo Tienga and said, "It seems this is little fellow Taoist's real origin and name." Since the other side was so friendly, Emo Tienga also smiled back. "Yes, Senior must be Senior Yuan Mu from Juyin sect?" Master Yuan Muzhinren nodded, then pointed at Venerable Avidya on the side. "This is Venerable Avidya from Huayan Temple. Little fellow Taoist should have met him before." Emo Tienga nodded, then saluted Venerable Avidya. "Senior Avidya, long time no see. How have you been?" Venerable Avidya still had the expression of a Maitreya Buddha. He put his palms together and saluted her. "Thanks to little fellow Taoist, I've been living well. It's only been 10 years since we last met. But little fellow Taoist's cultivation level has advanced again. Congratulations." After they finished greeting each other, Master Yuanmu pointed at Scholar Yu on the side. "This is Mr. Yu from Yu Mountain Academy." Emo Tienga couldn't help but find this young and refined teacher, Yu, somewhat similar to the young scholar she transformed into before. She couldn't help but feel interested, but she still politely saluted him. "Greetings, Mr. Yu." Scholar Yu just nodded with a smile. He didn't return her salute, nor did he answer. For a late-stage nascent soul cultivator, this was already considered very polite. Venerable Avidya was an exception. He was a Buddhist cultivator, so the principles he upheld were much gentler. Moreover, Venerable Avidya had always been amiable, so he returned the salute. Master Yuan Muzhinren picked up his teacup and took a sip. He didn't introduce her to the other cultivators, nor did he ask her to sit down. Emo Tienga also understood that in the eyes of these nascent soul seniors, she was only a core formation junior. Even if they were kind to her, they still didn't deserve too much courtesy. Therefore, she didn't care and just stood there calmly, letting others size her up. In any case, she was accompanied by Ling Yunha. Oh, there were also 2 core formation cultivators present, and they were both her acquaintances, Jiewu and Han Shizhi. Both of their cultivation levels had advanced, and their Jiewu had already advanced to the middle stage. Han Shizhi, like her, had also reached the peak stage. Wasn't it said that only nascent soul cultivators participated in the Sea of Returning Ruins this time? Ling Yunha was the sect head of Juyin sect, so it was reasonable for him to come and handle the matter. She didn't know much about Han Shizhi, but what about Jiewu? She remembered that Venerable Avidya's eldest disciple was Ju Xian, and Jiewu wasn't even his disciple. Thinking up to this point, a thought flashed in her mind. Could it be that the 2 of them were the masters of the other 2 holy objects? Before she had time to think about it, Master Taoist Yuanmu said, "Little fellow Taoist, are you from the celestial pole?" Emo Tienga's eyes brightened. "Senior also knows about the celestial pole?" Master Taoist Yuanmu said slowly. "I know a thing or two." He looked up and glanced at Emo Tienga meaningfully. "Little fellow Taoist, you're only a core formation cultivator, but you actually came to Yunzhong from the celestial pole. You're not simple." Based on what he said, this Master Taoist Yuanmu also knew that the journey from Yunzhong to the celestial pole was difficult. Thinking about it, there were also many high-level cultivators in the celestial pole who knew about Yunzhong. It was just that the South Sea was difficult to cross, so they didn't know about Yunzhong. Junior was just lucky, that's all. Hehe. Master Taoist Yuanmu didn't want to talk about this topic. In the next second, he stared at Emo Tienga with a fierce gaze, and his spiritual aura pressure rose sharply. "I heard little fellow Taoist isn't willing to hand over the Fuxing sword?" Under the deliberate spiritual aura pressure of a late-stage nascent soul cultivator, Emo Tienga was shaken even though she had a secret technique. However, she quickly recovered and said calmly, "Correct. Now that things have come to this, even if Junior hands over the Fuxing sword, it'll be useless to seniors." "Oh." Master Taoist Yuanmu withdrew his spiritual aura pressure and said faintly, "Little fellow Taoist, please tell me." Upon seeing his expression, Emo Tienga thought in her heart that this Master Taoist Yuanmu was worthy of being the real head of Juyin sect. Since he already knew she wasn't willing to hand over the Fuxing sword, Ling Yunha must have told him the reason, but he insisted on listening to her say it in person. In this way, her momentum was stolen, and she was at a disadvantage. However, she didn't care. I won't hide it from Senior. Junior has already recognized the Fuxing sword as its master, so I can't give it to Senior, Emotinga said faintly. Once she said that, Master Taoist Yuanmu didn't react, but the others were shocked. Venerable Avidya even opened his eyes. Only then did Emotinga realize that this Venerable Avidya wasn't blind. Junior, Scholar Yu closed the folding fan in his hand and asked with a calm expression, that Fuxing sword actually recognized you as its master? Correct. Emotinga stared at this late-stage nascent soul cultivator and said, Junior not only recognized the Fuxing sword as its master, but I also obtained Senior Fu Yaozi's inheritance. Upon hearing this, the expression of Master Taoist Yuanmu, who had always been very calm, changed greatly. He glared at her and said, You obtained Fu Yaozi's inheritance? He said this very loudly. He indeed had the demeanor of a cultivator who had lost his vitality. But no one cared about it now, because everyone's reaction was the same as Master Taoist Yuanmu's. Emotinga, on the other hand, was in a very good mood. She ignored the many nascent soul cultivator's ugly expressions and said with a smile, Correct. Speaking of which, Senior Fu Yaozi is worthy of being the #1 cultivator in Yunzhong. His divine sense has been sealed for several tens of thousands of years, but it actually still exists for so long. In the past few years, Junior obtained Senior Fu Yaozi's pointers and gained a lot. Clang. Emotinga keenly heard a light noise. Right after that, a nascent soul cultivator abruptly stood up with a magic weapon in his hand and shouted, Senior Martial Brother Yuanmu, why are you being polite to this Junior? Does she, a mere core formation cultivator, want to take a share of our fated chances? I'd like to see what she can do if she loses her life. Impudent, Master Taoist Yuanmu shouted, glaring at that Juyan sect cultivator. Do you think you can casually recognize a Five Saints item as its master? The nascent soul cultivator was stunned after being reprimanded. If we kill her, won't the Fuxing sword become a masterless item again? Idiot! Master Taoist Yuanmu couldn't care less about the fact that there were outsiders in front of him. He glared fiercely at that person and said, Sit down. The nascent soul cultivator reluctantly sat down, but his ferocious gaze was still fixed on Emotinga. Emotinga, on the other hand, just smiled, looking completely unaffected. Hee. While the others were furious, revered Wu Ming laughed and said, It seems little fellow Taoist came prepared. But I wonder if you have enough bargaining chips? Emotinga's gaze wandered as she asked with a smile. The method to open the mysterious space, the specific path, the key points to pay attention to, and even the method to obtain the immortal fate. I wonder if that's enough. Chapter 446. After a long time, Master Taoist Yuanmu took a deep breath and stared at Emotinga seriously. Junior, other holy objects also have owners, and you're not the only one who knows how to open the mysterious space. As for the method to obtain the immortal fate you mentioned, he paused, and a hint of killing intent appeared on his originally kind and amiable face. As long as I search your soul and turn you into a puppet, it won't affect the Fuxing sword's recognition of its master. Emotinga was still smiling and didn't even blink. Junior doesn't dare to say that Senior is wrong, but what Senior wants to know, even if you search my soul, it'll be useless. Master Taoist Yuanmu stared at her. Emotinga didn't say anything and looked calm. In the next moment, the expressions of several nascent soul cultivators suddenly changed. There was a strong fluctuation of divine sense in the air. Scholar Yu held his folding fan and frowned. This divine sense, with his cultivation level in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, it wasn't difficult for him to feel that this divine sense wasn't complete. But the hidden power of wind and thunder was something even he couldn't ignore. This divine sense appeared in a flash, and then slowly disappeared into the sword on Emotinga's back. Seniors, this is Junior's real bargaining chip. Emotinga cupped her hands at the crowd and said slowly. Maybe it was because her attitude was respectful, at least to save face for these nascent soul cultivators. Or maybe it was because her bargaining chip was so amazing that they had to consider compromising. In the end, These nascent soul cultivators didn't say anything. Even the irascible cultivators who clamored to kill Emotienga were silent. Master Taoist Yuanmu looked to the side. Revered Wu Ming was still smiling with his eyes closed, seemingly not ready to express his opinion. Scholar Yu looked gloomy, but in the end he sighed silently. Master Taoist Yuanmu withdrew his gaze and finally said, "Little fellow Taoist, what do you want? Please speak frankly." His voice was very calm, as if he had accepted this result. Fu Yaozi, the #1 cultivator in Yunzhong, was unrivaled for more than 100,000 years. His existence was already a legend, even though he only had a trace of divine sense left. Even though these people were already in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, they were still afraid of his prestige. Emotienga wasn't surprised by this result. She was just a nobody, but her master Fu Yaozi was a big shot. "Junior only wants what she deserves," she said calmly. "The share you deserve?" Immortal Yuanmu stared at her. "Little fellow Taoist, please speak clearly." Emotienga showed a faint smile and said with a modest expression, "In short, it's equal opportunities." But the next moment, blue veins appeared on Reverend Yuanmu's forehead. He took a deep breath and rubbed his forehead. After cultivating to the late stage of the nascent soul stage, his state of mind should have been calm and tranquil. However, today, he was repeatedly angered by a core formation cultivator. "What right do you have to have an equal opportunity?" The one who spoke was Scholar Yu. He stared coldly at Emotienga. "Even if you have Senior Fu Yao's divine sense protecting you, you're still just a core formation cultivator. Even if we agreed, would you dare to believe us?" As long as they found the immortal fate, they could casually wave their hands, and this junior would be reduced to ashes. They were two completely different sides, yet they wanted to have an equal chance? With the Fuxing sword in Junior's hand, Emotienga said faintly. She didn't care about Scholar Yu's attitude at all. These late-stage nascent soul cultivators were used to being high and mighty. How could they tolerate others taking a share from their hands? Especially since she was just a core formation cultivator. In their eyes, she was just a little better than an ant. "Little fellow Taoist." Master Taoist Yuanmu stared at her with a profound gaze, but his tone was flat. "I'll give you one more chance. If you obediently listen to me now, after we enter that mysterious space, I'll guarantee your safety, and even accept you as my disciple. What do you think?" Emotienga just smiled. Junior appreciates Senior's good intentions. He took another step back, but was once again rejected. Enlightened Master Yuanmu's expression darkened, and his voice deepened. "Don't you think your appetite is too big?" Emotienga said, 5 sacred objects, one for each of us. If Junior's appetite is really too big, what I want isn't an equal opportunity, but a 5th. After we enter that secret place, with Senior's abilities, you'll naturally obtain more things than Junior. Why do you want Junior to become a puppet and wait for Senior's alms? In the silence, Venerable Wu Ming finally spoke. Among the many nascent soul cultivators present, this late-stage nascent soul cultivator was the calmest. He still said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Yuanmu, Mr. Yu, why don't we let this little fellow Taoist rest first? This matter can't be rushed." Emotienga's trump card had been revealed, and she had also put forward her request. What was left was how they would deal with her, so it was useless to keep her here. Master Taoist Yuanmu thought for a while. Seeing that no one had any objections, he said, "Yunha, take this little fellow Taoist to rest." He didn't say anything polite to Emotienga, and didn't even glance at her. He was probably furious. Ling Yunha answered respectfully, "Yes, martial uncle." Then he cupped his hands towards Emotienga. "Qin. Oh, fellow Taoist Emo, please." Emotienga smiled and followed him out of the parlor. After walking with Ling Yunha for a while, she finally heard him say, "Fellow Taoist, you're really brave. You're not afraid at all in front of so many seniors." Emotienga just smiled. "I have no other choice." Ling Yunha was silent for a while, then suddenly said, "Fellow Taoist Qin, do you not trust me?" Emotienga was puzzled. "What do you mean, fellow Taoist Ling?" Ling Yunha frowned and said, "Although I'm only a core formation cultivator, I can still guarantee fellow Taoist Qin's safety." Emotienga was stunned. After thinking about it, she realized he misunderstood. He thought she didn't trust his guarantee and wanted to deal with the nascent soul cultivators to fight for a chance of survival. She shook her head and said, "Fellow Taoist Ling, you don't need to think too much. I wasn't trying to be fierce just now, and what I said wasn't false." "Really?" Seeing how calm she looked, Ling Yunhe couldn't help but believe her. "Was that really Senior Fu Yaozi?" Emotienga just smiled and didn't answer. Instead, she asked about something else. "Fellow Taoist Ling, I heard Julian Sek's sacred object is the soul restraining bead. Is it the soul restraining bead we saw in Carefree Valley that year?" "No," Ling Yunhe said. "The soul restraining bead I had back then was an imitation refined by one of my Ling clan's ancestors, based on the real soul restraining bead. However, its appearance and divine power are almost the same." "Oh, no wonder Ling Yunhe could also obtain the soul restraining bead back then. It turned out it wasn't the real one. Then, is fellow Taoist Ling the person chosen by the real soul restraining bead as its master?" When Ling Yunhe heard this, he stopped in his tracks and turned to look at her. Emotienga smiled. "I'm just guessing. If it's inconvenient, fellow Taoist Ling doesn't need to answer." Ling Yunhe turned back and continued to lead the way. "Fellow Taoist Qin's guess is correct. The person chosen by the soul restraining bead is indeed me." "Oh," Emotienga nodded. "Then the people chosen by the inescapable net and nameless list are Jiewu and Han Shizhi?" Ling Yunhe smiled. "Correct. Otherwise, how could core formation cultivators like us participate in such a grand meeting?" Emotienga furrowed her brows and thought to herself, "The three of them plus me are all in the core formation realm." She suddenly had an idea. She used her divine sense to communicate with Fu Yaozi. "Master, is there some secret behind this?" "Hehe." Fu Yaozi's voice rang in her mind. "The Fuxing sword recognizing you as its master was a coincidence, and it had little to do with your cultivation level. However, I think the reason why there are only 3 core formation cultivators is because the power of the key isn't enough." "Huh? Didn't I already tell you? Their divine sense secret technique isn't as good as mine." Presumably, after being sealed for so many years, their divine senses have gradually faded. If the power of the chosen nascent soul cultivators isn't enough, they can only choose core formation cultivators. So the other holy artifacts can choose whoever they want to recognize as their master. Then they can also change people at will? "It's not that simple," Fu Yaozi said. "Although the conditions for them to recognize a master aren't as strict as mine, they aren't that casual either. Moreover, because their divine sense secret technique isn't strong enough, their holy artifacts can only recognize a master once. So I'm certain they don't dare to take risks." Emotienga understood a little. In short, this master of hers was too scheming. "Master, your Fuxing sword needs people with spiritual roots of the origin to recognize it as its master. Spiritual roots of the origin rarely appear in 1,000 years, and because the 4 of them aren't strong enough, they can only recognize a master once. Isn't it too difficult to gather 5 people who can be recognized by the holy artifacts at the same time?" Fu Yaozi chuckled. "Even if we can't gather all 5, so what? The reason I played these tricks was because I wanted to leave behind an inheritance for myself. Even if the mysterious space in the Sea of Returning Ruins never opens again, what does it have to do with us?" Emotienga secretly wiped her sweat. In any case, he was only a wisp of divine sense now, and his true body had long advanced to the deification realm, so it really didn't have anything to do with him. As for the other 4 saints, she didn't know where they went. It was nothing more than leaving a fated chance for the younger generation. If they couldn't obtain it in the end, they probably wouldn't care. However, the living nascent soul cultivators certainly wouldn't care. In the living room, the nascent soul cultivators were silent, and all of them had ugly expressions on their faces. After a long time, Ling Xiyu asked, "Senior Martial Brother Yuanmu, is there really no other way? Although Senior Fu Yaozi is the #1 cultivator in Yunzhong, he's still a person from 100,000 years ago, and now, he only has a bit of divine sense left." Master Taoist Yuanmu held his teacup and didn't move for a long time. At that moment he sighed and said, How could it be that simple? Only now do I realize that Fu Yaozi is really much stronger than the founder. Someone was confused. What does Brother Taoist Yuanmu mean? His Fuxing sword is a holy artifact, but we also have holy artifacts in our hands. Can't we fight against him? Scholar Yu tapped the folding fan in his hand and said, Our 3 groups have chosen to cooperate. Everyone present is the elite of our 3 groups. Fellow Taoist Yuanmu, fellow Taoist Davidya, why don't we speak frankly? Master Taoist Davidya nodded with a smile. Fellow Taoists, you can decide. This old monk has no objections. Master Taoist Yuanmu also nodded after thinking for a while. He put down his teacup and glanced at the nascent soul cultivators present. Since that's the case, I'll explain it clearly to everyone. He paused for a moment and said, You probably don't know this, but holy artifacts can only recognize a master once. After that, the divine sense on it will dissipate. Unless the new master also reaches the same cultivation level as senior 5 sages and seals the holy artifact again, the holy artifact will be no different from an ordinary magic treasure. Ha! Exclamations sounded in the guest hall. This was a secret of the 3 sects, and not all nascent soul cultivators knew about it. Someone shouted, Senior Martial Brother Yuanmu. So you're saying that we must find all 5 holy artifacts and make them recognize us as masters before the person who recognizes us dies? Master Taoist Yuanmu shook his head. Our holy artifacts haven't recognized us as masters yet. He frowned. I've discussed with fellow Taoist Yuanming and Mr. Yu before. Before we confirm that all the holy artifacts can recognize us as masters, we won't let them recognize us as masters. Otherwise, once a holy artifact fails to recognize us as its master, the secret of the returning ruins, will be sealed forever. Ling Xiyu came to his senses. So, this junior has already made the supporting life sword recognize us as its master, and we're unable to find another master for the supporting life sword? That's right. This is the reason why the 3 of us have our hands tied. Scholar Yu's expression was gloomy. If this junior didn't know this, how could she be so arrogant? Soul searching and making her into a puppet were just methods to scare her. After she was made into a puppet, they weren't sure if the holy artifacts would still be as effective as before, and they wouldn't even consider giving up on such a fortuitous encounter. Furthermore, we're now faced with another problem, Revered Master Wu Ming said with a smile. We still can't be sure if the Heavenly Demon Tower has someone who can recognize us as its master. After a moment of silence, someone gritted his teeth. If the secret land of the returning ruins can never be opened because of this junior, I'll definitely crush her bones and scatter her ashes. Chapter 447. Fellow Taoist Qin. Ling Yunhe called from outside. We can go now. Mo Tinga stopped cultivating and came out of the virtual sky world. This Ling Yunhe already knew her real name, but he stubbornly called her fellow Taoist Qin, saying he was used to it and didn't want to change it. She shook her head, put away the restrictions in the room, and walked out of the door. Ling Yunhe was actually a good person. If it weren't for their positions, they could be friends, but it was unlikely for now. She made up her mind to return to the celestial pole as soon as this matter was over. Unless her strength increased greatly in the future, she would never set foot in Yunzhong again. After offending so many nascent soul cultivators, it was better to stay away from them. However, she didn't think she was greedy. What she wanted was nothing more than a chance to enter the mysterious space of the Sea of Returning Ruins, to look for fated chances. As for these nascent soul cultivators, as long as she obediently played the role of a key, they might just kill her with a wave of their hands after she lost her usefulness. As for what Master Taoist Yuanmu said about accepting her as a disciple, not to mention that she had a master, even if she really entered Juyan's sect, they wouldn't train her like they did with Ling Yunhe. They would most likely give her some random things to send her away. Besides, she had the virtual sky world, so how could ordinary treasures be rare? Fated chances were the only thing she wanted. Fated chances? It was this word that thoroughly offended these nascent soul cultivators. Fated chances weren't endless. She had the Fuxing sword, so her chances of getting fated chances were greater than others. If she got the key fated chances, others wouldn't. But why should she give up the chance she got? Although she didn't have enough cultivation level, unfortunately, she had the Fusheng sword that they didn't have. Fellow Taoist Ling, don't we have to wait anymore? Ling Yunhe said. There's news about the demonic tower, so there's no need to wait. The seniors have announced the time, so those nascent soul cultivators will naturally rush to the secret place before it opens. Emotinga nodded to show she understood. This kind of opportunity was hard to come by, so she naturally didn't want to miss it. Following Ling Yunhe, she met those nascent soul cultivators again. After a few days, these nascent soul cultivators had calmed down. Their gazes towards her were no longer angry, but very cold. Seeing her coming, Master Taoist Yuanmu said, "Okay, let's go." The other cultivators responded one after another, each using their own means and stepping on their flying treasures. Ling Yunhe, Han Shizhi, and Zhu Wu were brought along by their respective masters. Seeing as no one was paying attention to her, Emotienga also waved her sleeves. A cloud appeared under her feet as she activated her cloud-treading boots. All the nascent soul cultivators rose into the sky, turned into rays of light, and flew far away. One Leaf Island was just a small island. Almost all the cultivators were alarmed by the commotion. Most of the cultivators above the nascent soul realm had already received the news and left a long time ago. As for the core formation cultivators, they were both envious and jealous. Only a few of the bolder ones looked in the direction the light disappeared in and quietly followed it. Unfortunately, their efforts were futile. With the speed of a nascent soul cultivator, how could they keep up? Right now, Emotienga was using her cloud-treading boots with all her strength. She even took out the land-shrinking ruler to increase her speed. However, it was still too difficult to keep up with these nascent soul cultivators. If it weren't for the fact that they hadn't used their full strength, she would have been left behind long ago. Emotienga smiled bitterly in her heart. Why were these nascent soul cultivators so narrow-minded? They'd obviously agreed to her conditions, but they still had to watch her embarrass herself. In fact, these nascent soul cultivators were secretly surprised to see her barely keeping up with the group. Some of them even thought that since this female cultivator dared to discuss conditions with them, nascent soul cultivators, she really had some skills. They also remembered that her cultivation level was already in the peak stage of the core formation realm. As long as she had a fated chance, she could enter the nascent soul realm. At that time, she would be on the same level as them. With that in mind, those early-stage nascent soul cultivators no longer looked down on her. Emotienga had a hard time keeping up with them. The result of using all her strength was that her spiritual aura was draining too fast. She had no choice but to keep a high-grade restorative panacea in her mouth at all times. Despite that, she was still slowly being left behind. After flying for a while, Revered Avidya suddenly said, "Little fellow Taoist, let this old monk lend you a hand." As he said that, he waved his kasaya. A strong aura suddenly approached Emotienga and swept her over. In an instant, she was standing on Revered Avidya's lotus throne. Emotienga heaved a sigh of relief, then cupped her hands to express her gratitude. "Thank you for your help, senior." Revered Avidya smiled and said no more. He continued to fly forward on his lotus throne. Among these nascent soul cultivators, Revered Avidya treated her quite well. More than 10 years ago, when he asked her to return the inescapable net, he didn't make things difficult for her. This time, when other cultivators made things difficult for her, he once again extended a helping hand. She secretly rejoiced that she returned the inescapable net so straightforwardly. It was probably because of this that this Revered Avidya had a slight favorable impression of her. "Benefactor Emo, are you all right?" A voice entered her ears. Emotienga turned around and saw that it was Zhu Wu, who was also standing behind Revered Avidya. This Zhu Wu was tall, had thick eyebrows, big eyes, and looked very sturdy. However, he also looked honest and sincere. Right now, he turned his head to ask her. His expression was full of concern and didn't seem fake. Emotienga wiped the sweat on her forehead, then answered with a smile. "Thank you for your concern, fellow Taoist. I'm just a little tired. Zhu Wu also smiled at her, but still put his palms together, and obediently stood behind revered Avidya. A hint of confusion flashed in Emotienga's eyes. Back then, when she met Zhu Wu in Sky Snow City, he was driven out. He was very down and out, and he even robbed other cultivators with his junior martial brother. Although he kept some commandments in mind, what he did was really a bit. Moreover, when she killed his junior martial brother out of anger, he was very sad. Why didn't he blame her at all, and even cared about her now? Sensing her gaze from time to time, Zhu Wu turned around and smiled at her. Benefactor Emo, is there something wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? Since she was discovered, Emotienga bluntly said, Fellow Taoist Zhu Wu, please don't blame me. I just feel that you're very different from when we first met, so. I see. Zhu Wu still had a humble smile on his face as he said, What happened back then was because of this poor monk's mistake. Ever since I was brought back to Mount Baifu, by senior martial brother Zhu Xian, this poor monk has cut off all ties with the past. Is that so? Could it be that he doesn't even care about killing his junior martial brother? Little fellow Taoist, revered Avidya suddenly said, Zhu Wu cultivates Zen. Emotienga was stunned. He cultivates Zen? What does that mean? But Zhu Wu just smiled at her. He still stood there with his head lowered and didn't say anything. In the next few days, everyone focused on hurrying on their journey. During this journey, Emotienga saw numerous sea beasts in the sea of returning ruins. Their numbers ranged from the 5th rank to the 7th rank. There were even some 8th rank sea beasts once in a while. Fortunately, with so many nascent soul cultivators here, those sea beasts sensed their powerful momentum and flew far away before they could get close. Their journey was almost smooth sailing, and they soon arrived at their destination. Several days later, the group of nascent soul cultivators stopped in the sky above an isolated island in the sea. Looking at the island surrounded by clouds and mist under their feet, someone asked doubtfully, Senior Martial Brother Yuanmu, is this the place? Emotienga also had doubts in her heart. The island under their feet was a bit bigger than One Leaf Island, but it was bare and looked like a stone mountain without the slightest bit of spiritual aura. Of course, Master Taoist Yuanmu didn't explain, and directly landed on the island. The others also followed him, and landed one after another. There were already other cultivators waiting on the island. When they saw the cultivators from the 3 groups, they hurriedly went up to greet them. Emotienga glanced at them. Most of these cultivators were in the early stage of the nascent soul realm. They didn't look like they were from any big forces, so they could basically be regarded as extras. The biggest benefits would naturally be divided among the few biggest forces. As for these people, it would depend on their own fated chances. Emotienga thanked Venerable Avidya, then casually found a quiet corner and sat down cross-legged. In the following day, more and more nascent soul cultivators arrived, and their cultivation levels were also getting higher and higher. Fellow Taoist Yuanmu, fellow Taoist Avidya, Mr. Yu, you 3 came really early. Sensing another powerful spiritual aura approaching, Emotienga opened her eyes and saw another late-stage nascent soul cultivator descending with several disciples. This late-stage nascent soul cultivator looked like a skinny old man. He wore a tattered Taoist robe and held a horsetail whisk, but his voice was full of energy. So it's fellow Taoist Gua. Master Taoist Yuanmu greeted him with a smile. This is Taoist Gua from Pufa School. Ling Yunha came to her side and said softly, Taoist Gua looks unremarkable, but his diamond body refining technique is very good. There are very few people in Yunzhong who can break his body protecting technique. Emotienga nodded, indicating she understood. She then turned to Ling Yunha and smiled. Thank you for telling me, fellow Taoist Ling. You're still hanging out with me. Aren't you afraid of the sex elders getting angry? Ling Yunha laughed. Martial uncles and martial uncles don't care about this. They don't like fellow Taoist Qin because you show off too much and don't give them any face. Oh, Emotienga answered softly. It turned out her attitude was too tough, which made these nascent soul seniors unhappy. Speaking of which, these nascent soul seniors were really narrow-minded. Fellow Taoist Qin, we've known each other for many years, so I have to remind you, Although you have the Fuxing sword and Senior Fu Yaozi's help, you still have to be careful on this trip. After all, there are too many nascent soul seniors who came this time, and many of them are hot-tempered. Fellow Taoist Qin, you'd better restrain yourself. Hearing Ling Yunhe's advice, Mo Tiange smiled and thanked him sincerely. Thank you, fellow Taoist Ling. I understand. Seeing that she listened to his advice, Ling Yunhe smiled and seemed to be relieved. By the way, fellow Taoist Ling, did the master of the Heavenly Devil Tower also find a master? Ling Yunhe nodded. Yes. If not, how could he let us make the sacred objects recognize him as master? Mo Tiange thought about it and agreed. They were the ones who paid the most attention to the mysterious space in the Sea of Returning Ruins. Since they came here, they must have confirmed that the 5 sacred objects recognized them as masters and could open the space. Who got the Heavenly Devil Tower? This question made Ling Yunhe hesitate for a moment. In the end he said, fellow Taoist Qin will know soon. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.